Welcome back. This is Midnight Crime. Most of you fall asleep before the end, so hit subscribe now so you don't miss tomorrow's case. And before we begin, what time is it where you are, and where in the world are you tuning in from? Let's head straight into our first story. First story. At 6:30 a.m., Simon Glass finished his morning stretches and grabbed his gym bag to head out for his daily workout. The trunk of his own car reeked of bleach, a smell too strong to miss. But Simon was already thinking about his workout. Faint drag marks crossed the garage floor from the trunk to the driver's side door. He stepped over them, whistling a song, and climbed into the car. It was the last time anyone saw him. 3 months passed before a construction crew unearthed his gym bag at a remote building site. Inside, his wallet, his phone, and a pair of sneakers. Everything he would have taken to the gym. Everything. Except Simon. Detective James Rothwell arrived at the construction site at 9:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 months after Simon Glass vanished. The site's supervisor had already isolated the gym bag in a plastic containment tent, standard procedure once they realized what they'd found. The bag itself was synthetic nylon, navy blue, water-stained but structurally intact. No tears in the fabric. No decay consistent with 3 months of exposure. The odor inside was chemical neutral, suggesting it had been sealed or protected from the elements. Rothwell photographed the exterior first. The zipper's position, the dust pattern on the bottom, the faint discoloration near the left shoulder strap, where something had pressed against it repeatedly. Inside, the arrangement spoke of deliberate placement. The wallet lay at the bottom, the phone beside it, both wrapped loosely in a gray hand towel. The sneakers were positioned upright, heels touching the towel. Nothing scattered, nothing compressed beneath weight. A bag packed and stored, not abandoned in panic. The phone's serial number matched the one registered to Simon Glass. The battery was depleted, completely dead, corroded contacts along the port. Rothwell made a note. No way to power it down at the station without specialized equipment. He could already anticipate the tech team's work. The wallet contained $347 in cash, a driver's license, 2 credit cards, a library card, and a gym membership card dated 3 months prior. The credit card showed no purchases after his disappearance date. The cash, Rothwell counted it twice, was still there. Whoever had placed this bag knew what they were doing. Robbery was not the angle. The gym membership card interested him. The photo was recent, the laminate clean. On the back, in faded pen, a membership number and an expiration date. Still valid. He would need to contact the gym, review their access logs, see if anyone had attempted to use it in his absence. The sneakers were Adidas, size 11, the treads packed with dried mud from the construction site. Or were they? Rothwell extracted one shoe carefully. The mud was concentrated in specific grooves, as if the shoe had been walked in recently, not stored dry. He bagged it separately and noted the pattern for soil analysis. The towel was the detail that caught him. It was thin, synthetic microfiber, the kind used in gyms. The tag, faded but still legible, read property of Riverside Fitness Club. That matched the gym on Simon's membership card. But why wrap valuables in a gym towel and bury them together? He moved to the hand tools left at the scene. The construction supervisor had photographed everything before disturbing the find. A surveying rod positioned near the dig site, a utility knife with a retracted blade, a receipt from a hardware store dated the morning of Simon's disappearance. Rothwell retrieved the receipt. The timestamp was 5:52 a.m. The purchase, 1 20-liter container of industrial bleach, 1 box of heavy-duty contractor bags, 1 coil of nylon rope. The cashier's name was printed on the receipt, Derek. The location was marked as Riverside Hardware, Main Street. The cash register receipt was issued 3 hours before Simon's car was observed leaving his garage. Rothwell photographed the receipt in place, then bagged it. He would cross-reference the purchase date and time with the hardware store's security footage. He would identify Derek. He would reconstruct the entire transaction. Back at the station, he began with the phone. The tech team eventually extracted partial data from the corrupted storage. The last location ping came from the construction site, timestamp 4:33 a.m. on the morning of his disappearance. The phone's GPS had been active. The route it traveled showed a path from Simon's home address to a secondary location, a commercial property on Industrial Road, then to the construction site where the gym bag was buried. The vehicle tracking came next. Simon's car had a factory-installed tracking system tied to his insurance company. The log showed his vehicle leaving the garage at 6:41 a.m. But the phone's location ping, which should have been moving with Simon, showed stationary at the construction site by 4:33 a.m. The timeline fractured. The phone was at the site hours before the car left the house. Rothwell pulled the garage security footage from Simon's neighborhood. The camera mounted on his neighbor's home had a clear angle on his driveway. At 6:32 a.m., the garage door opened. At 6:33 a.m., Simon's car reversed out of the driveway. At 6:41 a.m., it left his street. The driver was visible through the windshield. The face was obscured by the early light and the angle of the camera. But the gait was wrong. Rothwell watched the figure walk from the house to the car. The stride was too long, the posture too rigid. Simon Glass was 5 feet 10 inches, with a recorded gait that favored his left side, an old running injury from college. The figure on the tape moved with even weight distribution, shoulders level. At the Riverside Fitness Club, Rothwell reviewed 3 months of access logs. The gym used keycard entry. Simon's card was last swiped at 6:18 a.m. on the morning he disappeared, a normal entry time. But the exit log showed his card swiped again at 1:28 p.m. the same day. No one at the gym that morning recalled seeing him after his initial arrival. Rothwell requested the internal gym security footage for that morning. The footage showed Simon entering through the front doors at 6:19 a.m., wearing the clothes visible in the neighbor's camera footage. He proceeded to the locker room. The camera outside the locker room door captured him entering. 8 minutes later, at 6:27 a.m., a figure emerged from the locker room wearing Simon's gym clothes, carrying the blue nylon gym bag. The figure moved directly to the front desk and swiped the exit card at 6:31 a.m. The face was still partially obscured, captured only in profile as the figure passed a side hallway. But Rothwell could see enough. A different jaw structure, a different neck angle. At 1:28 p.m., someone had re-entered the gym using Simon's card and exited immediately. A bluff, perhaps, to create confusion about his status. Rothwell went back to the construction site location on Industrial Road. The address corresponded to a vacant office complex scheduled for demolition. He pulled the property records. The last tenant had vacated 14 months ago. The building had been locked, according to the landlord, but Rothwell found evidence of forced entry, scratched lock mechanism on the side door, fresh prime marks on the frame. Someone had broken in during the time frame between Simon's disappearance and the gym bag discovery. Inside the building, the air was stale, undisturbed. Dust lay thick on the concrete floor except in one room on the second level, a space where something had been moved, the floor marked by dark scuff patterns and the pale residue of recent disturbance. Rothwell collected samples. The lab would identify it. Against the far wall, a single object remained, a heavy-duty contractor bag, the kind listed on the hardware store receipt. It was empty, sealed with nylon rope of the same gauge and brand. He bagged it. He photographed the scuff marks and the residue patterns. He noted the location of the building relative to Simon's home, for 0.2 kilometers east, relative to the construction site, 2.1 kilometers south. The case was becoming a geography of objects and movements, a map drawn in receipts and timestamps and dragged marks. But Simon Glass remained absent from all of it. Only his things marked where he had been. Rothwell stood in the empty room and observed the silence. There was more to find. The contractor bag contained a layer of crystalline residue. Rothwell had the lab run it immediately. The results came back in 48 hours. Sodium hypochlorite at 99.2% purity, consistent with industrial-grade bleach. Trace amounts of human blood, type O positive, the same as Simon Glass's recorded type. The bag had been rinsed, but the chemistry did not lie. Rothwell returned to Simon's house. The wife, Patricia, had granted access to the entire property for the investigation. She sat in the living room throughout his search, answering questions with a flat effect that suggested either shock or calculated restraint. He would return to her. First, the evidence. The garage was the starting point. The drag marks visible in the security footage still marked the concrete floor. Rothwell photographed them at multiple angles, then scraped samples from the deepest grooves. The lab confirmed textile fibers consistent with the towel wrapped around Simon's phone and wallet, mixed with traces of bleach and skin cells. The drag pattern began at the trunk and ended at the driver's side door, approximately 3 meters, the height and spacing consistent with something or someone being moved. The trunk itself held nothing unusual on casual inspection. Rothwell spent an hour examining every surface with oblique lighting. Under the left wheel well, he found what he was searching for, a series of scratch marks on the metal, fresh enough that primer was visible beneath the paint. Multiple scratches in a concentrated area, as if something had been secured with metal clamps or bracing and then removed. The scratches aligned with a small drainage hole in the trunk floor, a hole that should have allowed water to escape, but could have served another purpose if modified. He examined the drainage hole with a fiber optic camera. Inside, barely visible, was a fragment of rubber tubing, approximately 8 millimeters in diameter, lodged in the opening. Rothwell extracted it carefully. The tube was sectioned, cut cleanly with a sharp blade. One end showed adhesive residue, duct tape, aged but present. The other end was clean, suggesting it had been inserted and then withdrawn. The implication was immediate. Carbon monoxide, a hose from the exhaust to the interior of the trunk, sealed with duct tape. A method that left no marks on the body itself, no defensive wounds, no struggle visible in the forensic evidence. Just a sealed space, running exhaust and time. But the hose had been removed, and the body had been relocated. Rothwell moved to Simon's home office on the second floor. Patricia remained downstairs, her presence a quiet pressure in the house. The office was methodical in its organization, files arranged by category, receipts in folders, a desk calendar with entries in Simon's documented handwriting. The calendar showed routine. Gym visits marked at 6:15 a.m. on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. The entries continued through the morning of his disappearance. But on that date, marked with a small circle, a note appeared. Derek call 8 p.m. No other context. Rothwell photographed the calendar and cross-referenced the name. Derek, the cashier from the hardware store receipt. The purchase of bleach, rope, and contractor bags had been made at 5:52 a.m. 3 minutes after that timestamp, at 5:55 a.m., a phone call was logged to Simon's landline from a number registered to Derek Anthony Klingel, address on Meridian Street, approximately 1.8 kilometers from Simon's home. The call duration was 12 seconds. No voicemail was left, but the timing placed Derek at a phone, awake and active, 50 minutes before Simon's car was observed leaving the garage. In the office desk, Rothwell found the phone bill for the month in question. The landline showed no incoming calls listed for that morning. The bill was printed from the service provider's website, dated 2 weeks after Simon's disappearance. A recent print, not the original statement. But the original statement, if it existed, would be archived. Rothwell contacted the service provider directly. Within 6 hours, they provided the original electronic record. The discrepancy was clear. The printed bill from the house did not match the service provider's database. 3 incoming calls on the morning of the disappearance were absent from the printed version. The 5:55 a.m. call from Derek Klingel, a 6:08 a.m. call from an unknown number originating at a cell tower near the Riverside Fitness Club, and a 6:29 a.m. call from the same cell tower, lasting 4 minutes. Someone had accessed the online account and deleted the records before printing. The service provider confirmed. The account had been accessed at 2:14 a.m. on the morning following Simon's disappearance from an IP address registered to a residential gateway on Meridian Street, Derek Klingel's address. Rothwell obtained a warrant for Derek Klingel's residence at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. The house was a single-story structure, poorly maintained, with a detached garage at the rear of the property. The front door was answered by a woman in her 60s who identified herself as Derek's mother. Derek, she said, was not home. He worked nights at the warehouse distribution center on Harbor Road. The search warrant was executed. Inside the house, Rothwell found evidence of a hasty departure. Drawers left open, closet doors hanging, dust on surfaces where objects had recently been removed. In the garage, however, evidence remained. A workbench held tool marks consistent with the prime marks at the vacant office building. A set of nylon rope, partially used, matched the rope found binding the empty contractor bag. And on a shelf, partially hidden behind old paint cans, a cell phone. The phone was powered off. Its external casing showed damage consistent with impact trauma. The screen fractured, the backplate dented. Rothwell bagged it for tech analysis. When powered on at the station, the phone would not respond to its PIN. The screen displayed a device-disabled message. The last successful unlock was time-stamped at 6:45 a.m. on the morning of Simon's disappearance. The tech team eventually extracted the SIM card and accessed the archived data. The phone belonged to Derek Klingel. Its last location pinged before disabling was at the construction site. The timestamp, for 18 a.m. The messaging history showed a conversation dated 4 days before Simon's disappearance. Message from unknown number. Confirm you can access the account. Derek's response, yes. Password changed last week. They don't know. Message from unknown number. How much left? Derek's response, 62. Message from unknown number. After Friday. Then it goes to the new arrangement. No further messages existed. The phone was discarded immediately after. Rothwell pulled Derek Klingel's employment records from the warehouse distribution center. Derek was listed as a logistics coordinator, hired 14 months prior. His pay records showed a direct deposit into an account opened 6 months before his hire date. The account was flagged by the Financial Crimes Unit. Multiple deposits and withdrawals in cash. No identifiable source for the income. Total throughput of approximately $340,000 over 2 years. A background check revealed that Derek Klingel had a prior conviction for fraud, specifically the exploitation of access credentials. He had served 18 months in a federal facility for selling confidential customer information obtained through his work at a financial services company. Rothwell requested Simon's financial records. Patricia produced them voluntarily, her expression unchanged throughout the process. The records showed a pattern invisible on surface inspection. monthly transfers totaling $3,200 to an account belonging to a shell corporation registered to a post office box in Delaware. The transfers had begun 3 years prior and continued until the day of Simon's disappearance. A total of $115,200 transferred to an account that existed on paper only. The monthly transfer was accompanied by a memo line. Consulting. Simon had never mentioned consulting work to his wife. He had never deposited income from consulting. The transfers were made from a secondary account that Patricia claimed she did not know existed. The statements for this account had been delivered to a mail drop address 12 kilometers from the house, an address registered under a false name. The mail drop was operated by the Postal Service and serviced on Mondays and Thursdays. The current records showed no activity for the past 3 months, but archived logs indicated the box had been accessed regularly, usually after midnight, using the provided key. Rothwell checked the security footage from the postal facility. The cameras covered the exterior entrance and lobby, but the internal mailbox area was not recorded. The lobby footage for the 3 months preceding Simon's disappearance was archived, but intact. Rothwell reviewed each instance of the mail drop being accessed during night hours. On one date, 3 weeks before the disappearance, the footage showed 2 men entering the facility after 1 a.m. One was Simon Glass, confirmed by facial recognition and gait analysis. The other man was not visible to the cameras for more than a second. The angle was obscured, but his shoulder bore a small tattoo, a sequence of numbers, visible as he turned. The image was captured at 1:14 a.m. Rothwell enlarged the photograph. The numbers were 847921. A search of the database for matching tattoos returned 3 results. 2 were eliminated. The third matched a felony record. James Whitmore, age 47, convicted of securities fraud, money laundering, and wire fraud. His incarceration was listed as ongoing, but Rothwell checked the prison records and found an administrative error. Whitmore had been released on parole 12 months prior. His parole officer reported that Whitmore had violated the terms of his release and was last known to be in the state 4 months ago. The money transferred from Simon's secondary account had been sent to accounts that, when traced through shell corporations and offshore intermediaries, ultimately led to an investment firm owned in part by Whitmore's ex-wife. The paper trail was deliberately obscured, but the direction was unmistakable. Simon was funding something, or being forced to fund it. Derek Klingle's employment at the warehouse distribution center ended on the day after Simon's disappearance. He did not return. No forwarding address was provided. The warehouse supervisor recalled that Derek had requested a transfer 2 weeks earlier, citing family circumstances. The request was denied due to staffing needs. Derek had seemed agitated at the denial. The warehouse itself held records of internal access, card swipes for employees entering and exiting the facility. The records showed Derek accessing the building at 7:52 a.m. on the morning of Simon's disappearance. He exited at 4:38 p.m., a full shift. Unremarkable except that Derek had called in sick for his scheduled overnight shift at 11:15 p.m. that same evening, a shift he would normally have been present for. The gap between his departure at 4:38 p.m. and the call-in time at 11:15 p.m. placed Derek at an unaccounted location for nearly 7 hours. The call was made from his personal cell phone, the same device later found disabled in his garage. Rothwell obtained satellite imagery of the vacant office building on Industrial Road for the period in question. The images were captured at irregular intervals by commercial satellites, but one frame, timestamped at 7:34 p.m. on the evening of Simon's disappearance, showed a vehicle parked at the rear of the building, obscured but identifiable by its general silhouette as matching Derek's registered vehicle, a 2019 Honda Civic, silver. The building's inspection records, filed with the city, included a notation from a structural engineer dated the day before Simon's disappearance. Basement level integrity compromised. Recommend immediate evacuation and securing of sublevel access points. The report was addressed to the property owner and the demolition company scheduled to begin work 2 weeks later. Rothwell descended to the basement of the vacant building himself. The structural damage was evident. Sections of the concrete floor had cracked, exposing soil beneath. One corner of the basement had partially collapsed, creating a void below the floor level. The soil in and around this void was disturbed, darker than the surrounding earth, bearing the scent profile of decomposing organic matter mixed with chemical residue, the same bleach compound identified in the contractor bag. The void was accessible. Rothwell did not enter. He documented the location, extracted samples of the soil, and sealed the area pending further investigation. The lab results would take time, but the accumulation of facts had created a shape, incomplete, still fragmentary, but unmistakable. Simon Glass had been murdered. The evidence did not yet say by whom or for what final purpose, but it said clearly he had been killed in his own car, his body stored, relocated, and buried in the darkness beneath a condemned building. And somewhere in the network of transactions and deleted records and phone calls at dawn, another presence moved, the unknown number that had initiated the conversation with Derek Klingel. The voice that had said, simply, "After Friday." Then it goes to the new arrangement. That voice had not yet been identified. Rothwell recorded the fact and continued his search. The excavation of the basement void took 3 days. The structural engineers insisted on proceeding carefully. The floor above was unstable, and any disturbance risked collapse. Rothwell observed from the perimeter while the team removed soil layer by layer, screening each section through mesh to capture any artifact smaller than a grain of rice. At a depth of 1.4 meters, dental remains were recovered. A partial jaw with 3 intact molars, the bone bleached by chemical exposure but otherwise preserved. The dental record matched Simon Glass's last orthodontic work from 2019. The teeth showed were consistent with his age at death. Deeper still, at 1.8 meters, the team recovered fiber fragments from synthetic clothing, the remnants of the gray towel and portions of nylon gym bag material, degraded but identifiable through spectroscopic analysis. The chemical residue saturated the soil at this level, sodium hypochlorite at concentrations that indicated repeated application over the 3-month period. The bleach had preserved the organic matter beneath while destroying most soft tissue evidence. But not all. A leather object emerged intact from the soil at 2.1 meters, a wristwatch. The band rotted and disintegrated, but the face and mechanism preserved. The watch was a Seiko, model number consistent with Simon's known possessions. The crystal was intact. The hands had stopped at 6:57 a.m. Rothwell photographed the watch in situ before removal. The timestamp on the photograph was recorded, 2:33 p.m. on the 4th day of excavation. The watch face showed the time of death with a precision that contradicted the apparent sealing of the body in the basement. If Simon had died in his car between 6:30 a.m. and 6:57 a.m., his body would have been moved to the vacant building within hours, a window that aligned with Derek Klingel's gap in his warehouse records between 4:38 p.m. and 11:15 p.m., but that timeline required the body to have been stored elsewhere in the interim. Rothwell pulled the property records for Derek Klingel's mother's house again. The property included not just the residence and detached garage, but a storage shed built in the back corner of the lot, partially obscured by overgrown vegetation. The storage shed had been constructed 12 years prior, according to building permits. No one had accessed it in the past 8 months, according to the property manager's log. A warrant was obtained. The shed was opened at 10:22 a.m. on a Friday. The interior was accessed from the east side, where a padlock had been severed. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of industrial chemicals and decay, a smell that had accumulated in a sealed space for months, then been partially neutralized by the autumn cold and the door's temporary opening during the police search. The shed was approximately 3 by 4 meters. The floor was bare concrete, stained in a pattern that indicated a large container, likely the 20-liter bleach drum, had been positioned in the northeast corner and left there for an extended period. The stain pattern showed where liquid had seeped out and dried repeatedly. Against the western wall, stacked against each other, were 7 contractor bags identical to the one found at the vacant building. Each was sealed with nylon rope. Rothwell opened the first bag carefully. Inside, refuse, plastic wrapping, food waste, items of no apparent connection to the case. The remaining 6 bags contained similar material, household trash, accumulated debris, the refuse of a normal domestic life. But the bags themselves bore marking. On the interior surface of each, someone had written with a felt tip marker. The markings were simple, dates. The first bag was marked 11/3. The last was marked 11/29. The dates fell within the 3-month period between Simon's disappearance and the discovery of his gym bag at the construction site. Each bag corresponded to approximately 1 week's worth of household refuse. Rothwell documented the pattern. Someone had been collecting the trash from a residence and storing it in this shed, sealed in contractor bags, dated for reference. The purpose was clear: evidence segregation. The trash from the residence where Simon had been killed was being stored separately, removed from normal disposal channels, kept accessible for review or retrieval. Rothwell began a detailed inventory of the trash. The first bag, dated November 3rd, contained food waste consistent with a household of 3 people, multiple meal remnants, drink containers, pharmaceutical packaging. Among the refuse, wrapped in newspaper and tied with twine, was a disposable syringe and an empty vial. The vial bore a pharmaceutical label, midazolam, 5 milligrams per milliliter, 10 milliliter vial. A sedative, not uncommon, not requiring a prescription in many contexts, but typically administered by medical professionals. The syringe bore no manufacturer markings, suggesting it had been obtained outside normal pharmaceutical distribution channels. Rothwell bagged it separately. The lab would confirm the presence of residual midazolam in the needle. In the third bag, dated November 9th, a document was discovered, not discarded as trash, but deliberately wrapped and placed within the bag. It was a printout of an email correspondence. The header showed the message had been sent from an address, j.whitmore.consulting@protonmail.com, to a recipient address obscured but identifiable by Rothwell through database cross-reference as belonging to a financial services company. The email was dated 3 months prior to Simon's disappearance. The target is now isolated. The account structure is in place. Derek confirms access is operational. The consolidation will begin next week. Once the initial transfer is completed, we move to Phase 2. The contingency plan remains in effect if he becomes problematic. I will handle the transition personally. The signature was simply J.W. James Whitmore. The correspondence did not address Simon by name. It referred to him as the target. The language suggested a planned operation unfolding across multiple stages. The phrase contingency plan acquired a different meaning in the context of a corpse in a basement. Rothwell traced the financial records again with this intelligence. The monthly transfers of $3,200 from Simon's secondary account, the ones labeled consulting, had accelerated in the 3 months preceding the death. The most recent transfer, made on the morning of Simon's disappearance, was for $15,400. A single transfer, far larger than the regular monthly amount. The destination account was the same shell corporation, but this time, trace protocols revealed intermediate routing through a currency exchange in the Cayman Islands and a final deposit into a personal brokerage account registered to James Whitmore's ex-wife, Victoria Whitmore, age 51, current residence in Miami. Victoria Whitmore was known to law enforcement. Her name appeared in the Financial Crimes Database as a person of interest in 2 previous investigations, one involving wire fraud, the other involving the smuggling of bearer bonds. No charges had been filed in either case. She had cooperated with authorities in both instances, providing limited information about her ex-husband's activities in exchange for immunity agreements. Rothwell contacted Victoria Whitmore's listed phone number. A woman answered on the third ring. When presented with Rothwell's identification and the purpose of his call, the woman's tone shifted immediately. She stated that she would not speak without her attorney present and disconnected. The attorney response came within 4 hours. Victoria Whitmore invoked her immunity agreement and declined to provide any information regarding her ex-husband's current activities or financial arrangements. The immunity agreement, the attorney stated, specifically protected her from disclosure of information obtained during her previous cooperation with law enforcement. The immunity was a barrier, but it also confirmed a pattern. Victoria Whitmore knew something. She had been granted protection, which meant she had at some point been targeted or implicated. The protection had been extended to cover her present situation, which suggested that her involvement extended beyond her ex-husband's past crimes. Rothwell obtained the court records for the immunity agreement. The documents were sealed, but the header information was public. The agreement had been finalized 2 years prior, in connection with an investigation into money laundering operations in the Caribbean. The investigating agency listed was the Federal Bureau of Investigation Organized Crime Task Force. A request to the FBI for information about the underlying investigation was met with a standard response. The investigation was ongoing. No information could be disclosed without specific authorization from the case agent and the U.S. Attorney's Office. But Rothwell obtained the case agent's name from the court documents. Special Agent Margaret Hollister, based at the Miami field office. He placed a call. Hollister answered on the 4th ring. When Rothwell identified himself and explained the connection between his homicide investigation and her money laundering case, Hollister's response was immediate and direct. James Whitmore. Where is he? Unknown. He violated parole 12 months ago. Last known location was in-state. For months prior. A pause. Hollister was processing. When she spoke again, her words carried the weight of information being carefully released under strict parameters. Whitmore is not involved in money laundering. He is a facilitator for organized financial crimes, specifically the targeting of individuals with access to financial systems, the extraction of their assets through coercion, and the elimination of the target once the asset extraction is complete. We have documented 7 cases with similar patterns in the past 5 years. All victims in positions of financial authority. All deceased. All made to appear as suicides or accidents. Derek Klingel matches the profile of his usual accomplice, someone with technical access and a criminal history. But Klingel is new to the pattern. Victoria Whitmore provides the infrastructure, the accounts, the shell corporations, the institutional framework. She takes a percentage and provides immunity through strategic cooperation with multiple agencies. Simon Glass was not in a position of financial authority, Rothwell observed. No, Hollister said. That's new, and it means the profile has changed. If Whitmore is targeting individuals without institutional access, his operation has adapted, which means his client base has changed, which means someone else is directing the work. Rothwell requested all available information on the previous 7 cases. Hollister provided case files through secure channels, 7 names, 7 homicides, all dressed as accidents or suicides, all occurring in different jurisdictions across the country. The cases spanned from 8 years prior to 18 months prior. No coordinated investigation had connected them until Hollister's task force identified the financial patterns. The common elements were precise. Each victim had been targeted for financial extraction over a period of months to years. The extraction had increased in frequency as the victim approached the point of depletion. Once the major assets were transferred, the victim was eliminated. In 4 of the 7 cases, the method was vehicle exhaust. In 2, overdose. In 1, a fall from a building initially ruled as accidental. The 8th case, Simon Glass, differed in method and target selection, but the financial pattern was identical. Accelerated transfers in the final weeks, a single large transfer on the day of death, and the body disposed of in a location that ensured extended concealment. How did you know to look at this? Rothwell asked. We didn't, initially, Hollister said. Victoria Whitmore disclosed it during her immunity interview. She provided names, dates, locations, everything except Whitmore's current whereabouts. She claimed she did not know where he was. We believed her. She has no incentive to protect him. She profits regardless of his location. But she has incentive to protect the infrastructure. If Whitmore is apprehended, the operation does not end. Someone else takes over. The accounts remain. The shell corporations remain. The system persists. Who is the someone else? That's what we need to determine, Hollister said. Rothwell returned to the evidence collected from Derek Klingle's garage. The tools recovered, the pry bar, the rope, the duct tape, were forensic dead ends. No fingerprints. No identifying markings. The phone was the only source of actionable intelligence. The tech team had extracted partial data from the disabled phone. The deleted messages were recoverable through forensic imaging of the storage sectors. Beyond the initial conversation about account access and the cryptic message about the new arrangement, additional exchanges had been recovered. The hardware purchase is complete. Receipt is dated. Derek will handle the initial transfer. Once the account is locked, the next phase begins. Target shows no signs of discovery. The transfers have been accepted without question. No inquiries made. Derek will handle the vehicle. Make sure there are no witnesses to the warehouse departure. The gym membership creates distance. The gym bag creates misdirection. By the time they find it, the body will be unidentifiable. Derek will disappear. You will be in Miami. The account is already flagged as fraudulent. Victoria will claim victimization. The structure survives. The conversation continued, but the final exchange was the most revealing. What about the wife? The wife is not a problem. She suspects nothing. The secondary account was set up before their marriage. The transfers are classified in his documents as consulting income. She has no access. She benefits from his estate. She has no motivation to investigate. Once this is concluded, she will move on. A long silence. Then, you are certain about this? I am certain. The protocol has been refined through 6 previous operations. The wife question has been addressed in all of them. Victoria has verified the legal structures. Once the death is processed as an accident or suicide, the wife inherits. The inheritance is clean. The origin cannot be traced. She will not ask questions she does not want answered. The phone records ended there. The final message was sent at 11:08 p.m. on the evening of the 4th of November, 3 days before Simon's disappearance. Rothwell returned to Patricia Glass's residence without warning. She was home, dressed in dark clothes, her appearance unchanged from the previous weeks. When Rothwell informed her that he was reopening his questions regarding her knowledge of Simon's secondary account and the consulting income, Patricia's demeanor shifted minutely, a tension in her jaw, a lengthening of her breath. "I did not know about the account," she said. "The account was opened before your marriage," Rothwell stated. "That means Simon established it during his first marriage or shortly before it ended. You never questioned him about it. He said it was consulting work. I had no reason to doubt him. The consulting work generated $115,200 over 3 years. Yet no consulting contracts exist. No client records exist. No invoices exist. Nothing but transfers from an account you did not know about to shell corporations you could not identify." Patricia's expression did not change, but her hands moved, a subtle gesture, fingers pressing together in her lap, a physical response to stress. "I did not know," she repeated. Rothwell observed the photograph on the mantelpiece behind her, Patricia and Simon at their wedding, both smiling, the image captured in afternoon light. He observed the other photographs on the shelves, vacations, social events, a life documented in images. He observed the condition of the house, meticulous, organized, nothing out of place. A woman who controlled her environment with precision. "Did Simon ever mention James Whitmore?" Rothwell asked. Patricia's eyes narrowed. The reaction was minimal but present. She had heard the name. "No," she said. "Did he mention Derek Klingel?" "No." "Did he ever indicate that he was being coerced or threatened?" A longer pause. Patricia's hands released, and she placed them flat on her thighs. A deliberate gesture. A reset. "No," she said finally. Simon seemed normal. He went to work. He went to the gym. He came home. He was a routine man. I did not observe anything unusual. Rothwell recorded her statements and made note of the hesitation before the final answer. The hesitation suggested that Patricia had observed something unusual, but she had elected not to report it. Or she had observed nothing, but was now reconstructing her memories through the lens of what she now knew. The inheritance records confirmed Rothwell's hypothesis. Patricia had been named as the sole beneficiary of Simon's estate. The total value was $890,000, significantly higher than Simon's documented salary would have accumulated over their marriage. The increase corresponded precisely with the deposits from the consulting account. The inheritance had been processed through probate and released to Patricia 45 days after Simon's death was ruled accidental. The official cause listed was carbon monoxide poisoning, an incomplete combustion in the vehicle's exhaust system, a mechanical failure that had gone unnoticed. No autopsy had been performed. The body, recovered from the basement of the vacant building, had been so thoroughly treated with industrial bleach that positive identification required dental records and the wristwatch. The coroner's office had documented the presence of bleach residue as evidence of post-mortem treatment for cosmetic purposes, a practice not uncommon in funeral preparation. The toxicology report, rushed through for the accelerated probate process, showed elevated carbon monoxide levels in the blood, consistent with the stated cause of death. No mention was made of the bleach exposure, the sedative residue in the syringe, or the evidence of prolonged storage in a basement. Rothwell reviewed the coroner's report line by line. The autopsy had not been thorough. The examination had been cursory. The cause of death had been presumed rather than demonstrated. He obtained a warrant to exhume Simon's body for a second autopsy. The exhumation was scheduled for the following Monday. Patricia received notice of the procedure. She did not respond or request to be present. The night before the exhumation, Rothwell reviewed the deleted phone messages one final time. A detail emerged that he had initially overlooked: the phrasing in one of the messages. The wife benefits from his estate. She has no motivation to investigate. The statement was not a speculation. It was a documented fact. Someone had verified that Patricia would benefit and would not investigate. That someone had sufficient knowledge of Patricia's financial situation, her relationship with Simon, and her psychological profile to make a confident prediction. That knowledge had been obtained somewhere, through investigation, observation, or disclosure. Rothwell pulled the financial records for Patricia's personal accounts, the accounts she had full control over, separate from any joint holdings. The records went back 8 years. He observed the pattern: steady income, steady expenses, nothing unusual, nothing out of the ordinary, until the final 3 months before Simon's disappearance. A withdrawal of $60,000 had been made in cash from Patricia's savings account 8 weeks prior to the death. The withdrawal was processed through an ATM machine at a location 8.2 kilometers from the couple's home. The transaction was recorded with a timestamp, 1:47 a.m. The 1 a.m. withdrawal was unusual. The amount was significant. The timing was deliberate, late enough to avoid observation, early enough to be completed before dawn. Rothwell requested the ATM security footage for that date. The footage was archived but intact. The withdrawal at 1:47 a.m. showed Patricia herself at the machine, removing cash in bundles of $100 notes, stuffing them into an envelope, and departing the location. The footage showed her expression throughout: calm, composed, focused. Not the face of someone making an emergency withdrawal, the face of someone executing a planned transaction. Rothwell played the footage again and observed something else. Patricia was not alone. In the background, visible in the ATM's security camera, a second figure waited by the exit, partially obscured, face away from the ATM footage looped on Rothwell's monitor. He watched Patricia's hand emerge from the machine, the envelope fat with cash, her fingers closing around it with the certainty of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and why. The figure in the background remained a silhouette, but the timing was critical. The withdrawal at 1:47 a.m., 8 weeks before Simon's death, placed the cash in motion long before Derek Klingel had purchased the bleach and rope. Rothwell paused the footage and examined the figure in the background. The angle was poor, the lighting insufficient, but the posture suggested someone of average height, slight build. The clothing was nondescript, dark jacket, no visible distinguishing features. And yet the positioning was deliberate. The figure stood at the exit, positioned to observe Patricia's transaction without entering the camera's direct view. He pulled the security footage from Patricia's banking institution for the same date. The interior cameras would have captured her entry and exit. The footage showed Patricia entering at 1:42 a.m., approaching the ATM, and beginning her transaction. At 1:45 a.m., the glass door opened, and the second figure entered the facility. The figure was now visible. Female, approximately 50 years old, with blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a gray business suit, incongruous for the hour. She approached the counter, spoke briefly to the security guard on duty, and handed him a document. The guard examined it, nodded, and the woman departed. Rothwell froze the frame and examined the document. It was a banking credential, a loan officer's identification, or something similar. The woman's name was not visible in the footage, but her bearing was professional, authoritative. She had accessed the facility under the pretext of business, observed Patricia's transaction, and departed without drawing attention. A woman of approximately 50 years old. Blonde hair. Professional presentation. Rothwell pulled the file on Victoria Whitmore again. The photograph from her Miami real estate agent's listing showed a woman of 51, blonde, with sharp features, and a direct gaze. The resemblance to the woman in the ATM footage was evident, but not conclusive. The resolution was insufficient for positive identification, but the timing was not. Victoria Whitmore's travel records, obtained through her credit card statements, showed a flight from Miami to the state's capital on the day prior to the ATM withdrawal. A hotel stay for one night at a property 5.2 kilometers from the ATM location. A departure flight on the morning following the withdrawal. Victoria Whitmore had been in the city on the night of Patricia's cash withdrawal. She had been at the bank. She had observed the transaction. Rothwell's mind moved through the logic. Derek Klingel had initiated contact with James Whitmore, the unknown number in the phone records, approximately 1 week after Victoria's visit. The financial infrastructure was already in place. The shell corporations were operational. The secondary account in Simon's name was accessible. But something had triggered the acceleration. Victoria's observation of Patricia, the verification that Patricia had cash available, and the willingness to participate in the scheme. The $60,000 withdrawal was the deposit. Patricia's participation was the key. Rothwell pulled the probate records again and examined them with new clarity. Patricia had inherited $890,000. But the inheritance process had been accelerated through legal filings that suggested prior arrangement. The documents bore the signature of an estate attorney named Robert Kellerman, located in a practice that specialized in rapid probate processing. Rothwell obtained the records from Attorney Kellerman's office. The filing for Patricia's probate had been initiated within 72 hours of Simon's death being declared an accident. The paperwork was complete, comprehensive, and prepared with a precision that suggested pre-drafting. The documents had been signed and witnessed by Kellerman and his paralegal on the date of filing. But a detail caught Rothwell's attention. The address listed for Patricia Glass in the probate documents was not her current residence. It was a mailing address in care of a law office in Miami. The Miami address corresponded to Victoria Whitmore's attorney's office. The connection crystallized. Patricia had been contacted by Victoria Whitmore or someone acting on Victoria's behalf. Patricia had been informed that her husband was extracting money from the family finances through a hidden account. She had been offered a solution: cooperate with the operation, allow the asset extraction to proceed, and collect the entire inherited estate when Simon's death was processed as an accident. The $60,000 withdrawal was Patricia's share of the scheme, payment for her cooperation and silence. Victoria Whitmore had verified Patricia's knowledge of the secondary account and her willingness to benefit from its liquidation. The verification had occurred at the ATM. The cash was payment. The arrangement was sealed. Rothwell reviewed the deleted phone messages with this understanding. The wife benefits from his estate. She has no motivation to investigate. This was not a prediction. It was a documented assurance. Victoria had already made contact with Patricia. The arrangement was already in place. But there remained a final detail that did not align. The phone message referring to Derek will handle the vehicle. Derek Klingel had not been identified as the individual who had impersonated Simon at the gym. The figure in the gym security footage was taller, broader-shouldered than Derek. And the figure who had driven Simon's car from the house at 6:41 a.m. was similarly mismatched in build to Derek's documented physical profile. Rothwell pulled the driver's license photograph for James Whitmore. The image was 8 years old. Whitmore at 39, hair dark, facial structure sharp. But the height was listed as 5 feet 11 inches, the weight at 185 pounds. The footage from Simon's neighborhood showed a figure of similar proportions. Whitmore had impersonated Simon at the gym. Whitmore had driven the car from the house. Derek Klingel had provided the access credentials and technical facilitation. Victoria Whitmore had established the financial infrastructure and cultivated Patricia's cooperation. And Patricia had remained silent, collected the inherited assets, and moved forward with her life. Rothwell sat back from his desk and allowed the architecture of the crime to settle into clarity. It was a systematic operation, refined through previous iterations, adapted to each new target. The victim was identified, someone with financial access or family assets to extract. The victim's spouse or partner was approached and bought off with a share of the proceeds. The victim was sedated, asphyxiated, and disposed of in a location that ensured extended concealment. The death was processed as an accident. The inheritance was accelerated and released. The conspirators dispersed. 7 previous victims had followed this pattern. Simon Glass was the 8th. But Simon was different. He had no institutional financial access. His assets were modest. His estate was valuable only because of the hidden account, the consulting payments that were, themselves, fraudulently generated from Victoria's shell corporations, which meant Simon had not been selected for what he had. He had been selected for what he owed. Rothwell pulled the consulting account records one more time. The deposits into Simon's account had originated from shell corporations registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. But the source of those deposits was traceable through Victoria's financial records to a single origin: the proceeds of investment fraud conducted by James Whitmore and Victoria Whitmore over a 10-year period. The consulting income was money laundering. Simon's account was a washing machine. The cash was placed into Simon's secondary account, where it accumulated legitimacy through the appearance of earned income. The money was then transferred out to other accounts, further obscured by the network of shell corporations. The $115,200 that had passed through Simon's account over 3 years was part of a larger operation, estimated by the FBI to exceed $8 million across multiple victims. But Simon had not been randomly selected. Rothwell examined the original account creation date, 3 years prior, immediately following Simon's hire at his current position as a financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm. Simon had access to client databases. He had clearance to view trading accounts. He had credentials that could be exploited through social engineering or direct coercion. But Simon had never been used for that access. His account had only been used for money laundering, which meant either Simon had refused to cooperate with the exploitation of his work credentials, or he had begun to suspect the account's true purpose and had become problematic. Either way, the solution was the same: eliminate the target, process the death as an accident, transfer the inherited assets to a cooperative spouse, and move to the next operation. Except Patricia had not been cooperative through fear or coercion. Patricia had been cooperative through greed. She had known about the secondary account, not through her own discovery, but through direct communication from Victoria Whitmore. She had known that the account contained money that did not belong to her husband, and she had agreed to remain silent about its extraction in exchange for inheriting the entire estate. Rothwell picked up the phone and called Special Agent Hollister at the Miami field office. "I have the resolution," he said. Patricia Glass knew what was happening. She was not a victim. She was a co-conspirator. He detailed the ATM footage, the timing of Victoria's visit, the probate documents routing through Miami, the $60,000 cash withdrawal. Hollister listened without interruption. When Rothwell finished, Hollister was silent for a long moment. "You are certain?" she asked. "The evidence is conclusive," Rothwell said. Patricia Glass participated in the conspiracy to extract her husband's assets and conceal his death. She received direct payment and will receive the inherited estate. She had no motivation to investigate because she was part of the investigation's obstruction. "We will move on Victoria immediately," Hollister said. "But Patricia is your jurisdiction. The state homicide laws will apply. She is not an accessory. She is a co-principal in the conspiracy to commit murder. Rothwell disconnected and began preparing the arrest warrant. The evidence was methodical, layered, and complete. The deleted phone messages, the ATM footage, the travel records, the probate filings, the financial routing through Victoria's attorney's office, the $60,000 withdrawal timing. Patricia had been approached 8 weeks before her husband's death. The arrangement had been made. The participation had been secured. And when Simon died, Patricia had inherited the spoils and remained silent while the investigation proceeded around her. Rothwell typed the warrant request and submitted it for judicial review. Within 3 hours, the warrant was approved. He drove to Patricia's residence at 4:15 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, a deliberately unremarkable time, a day chosen without significance. He brought 1 detective and 2 uniformed officers. No spectacle, no unnecessary personnel. Patricia answered the door when he knocked. Her expression did not change when she saw his identification and the warrant. She simply nodded, stepped aside, and allowed them to enter. "I want to speak to an attorney," she said before he could read her rights. Rothwell read them anyway, his voice steady and methodical. Patricia listened without interruption. When he finished, she extended her hands, wrists together, ready to be handcuffed. She did not resist. She did not cry. She did not protest her innocence. She simply moved through the process with the same calm precision she had brought to the ATM withdrawal 8 weeks prior. During the drive to the station, Patricia sat in the back of the patrol car and looked out the window at the streets passing by. She observed the world moving around her with the detached interest of someone watching a film, present but separate. Rothwell did not speak to her. There was nothing left to say. The evidence had spoken. The logic had resolved. The crime had been committed not by a distant actor, but by the woman sitting in the back seat, the wife who had sold her husband for $60,000 and an inherited estate. In the interrogation room, with her attorney present, Patricia exercised her right to silence. She did not confirm or deny the charges. She did not explain her motivation or her knowledge. She simply sat, composed and still, while the evidence was presented and catalogued. The case against her was systematic and complete. The arrest warrant would be filed. The charges would be brought. The legal process would unfold. But Rothwell knew the truth already, and he had not needed her confirmation to understand it. Patricia had not been a victim of James Whitmore's conspiracy. She had been a participant. She had known that the consulting account was illicit. She had likely known that her husband's death was imminent, and she had decided that the inheritance was worth the silence. That decision, documented in ATM footage and probate filings and the timing of a single cash withdrawal, was the final piece of evidence. Not the smoking gun, but something more damning. The paper trail of a woman buying her way out of poverty and into wealth, one transaction at a time. Rothwell filed his report and closed the case file. The investigation would continue. The FBI would pursue Victoria Whitmore and the network of shell corporations. Derek Klingel would eventually be apprehended or disappear entirely. James Whitmore remained at large, his whereabouts unknown. But the local homicide was resolved. Simon Glass had been murdered by individuals acting in coordination, motivated by profit and systematic asset extraction. His wife had facilitated the crime and benefited from its consequences. The facts were recorded. The evidence was preserved. The truth, in all its mundane and terrible specificity, had been documented. Rothwell closed his office door and went home. The case was over. The work remained. Second story. A retired postal worker in suburban Ohio noticed her electric bill had tripled over 6 months. The electric company insisted her usage patterns showed constant heavy appliances running through the night. When she reviewed her account history, She discovered someone had opened a second utility connection using her name and address, and had been operating an illegal indoor grow operation in a vacant building 2 blocks away. The postal worker's name was Margaret Hollis. She sat in the utility office on a Wednesday morning in late September, the fluorescent lights casting everything in a flat, institutional hue. The account manager, a woman named Deborah, pulled up the billing history on her screen and turned the monitor toward her. "These are your connections," Deborah said, pointing to 2 separate account numbers. "Both registered to this address. Both active for approximately 4 months." Margaret studied the accounts. The first was hers, the one she'd maintained for 23 years. The second showed a connection date of May 15th. The billing pattern was unmistakable. The second account consumed between 8,000 and 11,000 kilowatt hours per month. Her own usage had remained stable at roughly 800 kilowatt hours monthly. "I didn't authorize this," Margaret said. Deborah printed out the application. The signature at the bottom of the form resembled Margaret's own, but the loops were tighter, the pressure uneven. The handwriting wavered slightly on certain letters. She observed the inconsistencies without emotion. The G in the second account sagged, while her own G maintained consistent height. The initial M in the second application was oversized, almost theatrical. The second meter had been installed at a property 2 blocks away on Ashland Street. Margaret knew the building. She'd walked past it hundreds of times during her 32 years delivering mail. A 2-story structure of red brick, boarded windows, a flat roof. It had been vacant for at least 3 years. She drove there that afternoon. The street was quiet. No cars in the immediate vicinity. She parked 1 house down and approached on foot. The front entrance had been sealed with a chain and padlock, the kind available at any hardware store. Above the door, the address was visible in faded numerals, 2847. The brass numbers themselves had oxidized to a dull green. Around the rear corner, she found the meter. It was mounted 6 feet up on the exterior wall, separated from the main structure by an aluminum conduit running along the brickwork. The meter's digital display showed active consumption. The dial was rotating. Someone was using electricity inside this building at that moment. She noted the installation date stamped on the meter's housing, May 15th, 2026. 5 months of operation. She tried the rear door. It was locked, but the frame showed fresh gouging around the lock mechanism, with splinters on the concrete step, still pale and unweathered. She photographed the damage with her phone, the image timestamp showing 2:36 p.m. The following morning, Margaret filed a report with the police. The officer who took her statement was named Kevin Paulson. He was professional but visibly understaffed, his notebook already filled with annotations from the morning's calls. He said he would look into it and provided her with a case number, 2026 to 47,892. 3 days elapsed without contact. Margaret called the police department on Friday. Officer Paulson explained that they were coordinating with the fire marshal's office. An inspection would require a warrant. He suggested she contact the utility company again to demand an immediate disconnection of the second account. The utility company complied. The meter was deactivated on Saturday, September 28th at 3:21 p.m. Margaret received a confirmation email with a timestamp and the notation, account 2847A discontinued per customer request. That same evening, she received a call from Officer Paulson. "There's been activity at the property," he said. Neighbors reported unusual noise around 8 p.m. By the time units arrived, the building appeared empty, but we did recover some items. He asked her to come to the station. In a small evidence room, under fluorescent light identical to that in the utility office, Paulson presented her with several items arranged on a steel table. He wore latex gloves, and did not permit her to touch anything. There was a receipt from a hydroponic supply store in Columbus, dated August 3rd. The itemized list included reflective mylar, ballast lighting kits, and 37 bags of nutrient solution. The total came to $4,847. The payment method was printed at the bottom, a credit card ending in 7421. There was also a spiral notebook, its pages filled with handwritten notations. Temperature readings, humidity percentages, dates and times. The handwriting matched the signature on the fraudulent utility application, the same wavering loops, the same oversized capitals. The entries spanned from May 17th through September 27th. Paulson turned to a third item, a key, standard brass, unremarkable. On the bow, someone had etched initials, RD. "We found this on the floor near the rear entrance," Paulson said. "We're running prints now. The building's owner lives in Florida. He hasn't visited the property in years. He confirmed the lock was intact when he last inspected in March." Margaret examined the images of the items without touching them. The notebook's final entry was dated September 27th, the day the electricity was disconnected. It read, "Shut down. Moving operation. RD." Paulson explained that the credit card used for the supply purchase had been cloned. The actual cardholder was a resident of Dayton who reported the fraudulent charge in late August. That investigation was now being coordinated with this case. The utility company, when pressed, admitted they had minimal identity verification procedures for secondary connections. The address matched a customer file. The signature had not been verified against existing documentation. The application had been processed and approved in less than 48 hours. Margaret asked Paulson if they would find whoever was responsible. "We have the initials. We have the handwriting. We have the credit card fraud trail," he said. "It's a starting point. But RD is fairly common. No fingerprints on the key so far. The building itself had been stripped, no personal items left behind. Whoever this is, they moved fast once that meter was deactivated." He closed his notebook. "We'll continue investigating. But I'll be honest with you. These operations are typically part of a larger network. One person running equipment, another handling distribution, another managing finances. The key person might be anywhere by now." Margaret left the police station at 5:42 p.m. The sun was already low. She drove past the building on Ashland Street. The boarded windows were still dark. The meter on the wall was silent. The investigation remained open. Officer Paulson called Margaret on October 3rd at 9:15 a.m. The fire marshal's office had approved the warrant. They were entering the building on Ashland Street that afternoon. He asked if she wanted to observe. She arrived at the property at 1:23 p.m. Two fire marshal vehicles were parked at the curb, their lights dormant. A third vehicle, unmarked, belonged to the county sheriff's forensics unit. Officer Paulson stood near the rear entrance with two men in protective suits, their respirators hanging at their necks like collars. One of the men held a thermal imaging device. The other carried a heavy halogen bar. The rear door was still locked. The fire marshal, a man named Robert Kessler, inserted the halogen bar into the space between the door and frame. The wood split with a sharp crack. The sound echoed in the quiet street. No one moved for 10 seconds. Then Kessler pushed the door open. The smell emerged first. A dense, organic reek, nutrient solution mixed with stagnant water and decomposing plant matter. Margaret observed her own physical reaction. Her throat tightened. She stepped back. Paulson remained motionless. Kessler and the second marshal entered. Their footsteps were audible on a concrete floor. A light clicked on inside. The beam of a flashlight swept across the interior darkness. Clear on the first, Kessler's voice carried through the doorway. They waited approximately 4 minutes. Then Kessler reappeared, his respirator now in place. He made a gesture to Paulson. The officer turned to Margaret. "We need to secure the scene," he said. "You can come as far as the entry room, but you don't touch anything." Margaret followed him through the rear door. The interior was a study in controlled systems gone dormant. The room they entered was perhaps 12 feet by 15 feet, lined entirely with plastic sheeting. The sheeting was clouded. Condensation had accumulated and then dried repeatedly, leaving mineral deposits that created a translucent fog across the material. The concrete floor was wet. A water line, perhaps a quarter-inch wide, ran along the baseboard, indicating how high the moisture had risen. Two large plastic reservoirs sat against the far wall, each approximately 4 feet long. Both were empty. Residue remained on the interior surfaces, a crusty white deposit that Paulson identified as dissolved mineral salts. Empty nutrient bottles were stacked in a cardboard box near the reservoirs. Margaret counted 17 bottles before stopping. A folding table had been converted into a workstation. On its surface lay a digital timer, its battery compartment still containing 2 AA batteries. The device's programming showed 3 irrigation cycles per day, each lasting 47 minutes. The last cycle had been programmed for 8:45 p.m. on September 27th. The timer was no longer active. "He left this behind," Paulson observed. He did not touch it. The second room, accessible through a doorway covered with heavy black plastic, was larger, perhaps 30 feet long. The air inside was noticeably cooler, though not cold. The plastic sheeting here was more elaborate, layered and taped at every seam. Reflective mylar hung in panels from the ceiling, creating distinct zones. Each zone contained mounting brackets where grow lights had been attached. The brackets remained. The lights and ballasts were gone. The floor of this room was scored with deep grooves, channels cut into concrete where standing water had flowed repeatedly. Equipment had been dragged across these channels. Margaret observed the directional pattern. All grooves led toward the exterior wall, toward the boarded window. This was how supplies had been moved, how the plants had been removed. In the corner of the grow room, a 5-gallon bucket remained. It was empty, but bore a label. Paulson photographed it without touching. The label, faded but still legible, read, "Rockwool Starter Cubes, 500 count. Batch code 34J 2026. A length of PVC pipe ran along the floor. At its terminus, connected to a timer valve, was a drip emitter line. The line had kinked repeatedly, and the plastic had begun to crack along the stress points. A faint mineral deposit clung to the inside of the tubing where water had evaporated. The electrical system was visible now. Heavy-gauge extension cords, orange, industrial grade, ran along the baseboards and up the walls. They were plugged into surge protectors, which had been daisy-chained together in a way that violated standard safety protocols. One protector bore scorch marks on its outlets. The plastic around the highest temperature area had begun to melt slightly, creating a smooth depression. Paulson called over his shoulder. "Forensics is here. They'll document everything." 2 crime scene technicians entered the space, cameras in hand. They began photographing the perimeter. One technician carried a handheld air quality monitor. She activated it. The device emitted a faint beeping as it sampled the air. "Still elevated on particulates," she said to Paulson. "Likely residual pollen and airborne nutrients. It'll dissipate." Margaret returned to the entry room. A detail she had not observed during the initial entry became apparent. The water on the concrete floor was not uniform. In certain areas, the moisture was darker, almost ochre-tinted. She pointed this out to Paulson. He nodded. He knelt and observed without touching. "Nutrient solution, leaking from those reservoirs over months. It stains the concrete. We'll get a sample for analysis." The The workstation timer remained the central detail. Paulson photographed it from multiple angles, including a close-up of the digital display screen. The timestamp data in the device's memory would show exactly when each irrigation cycle had run. That information could be retrieved once the device was brought to the lab. In the cardboard box near the empty bottles, Paulson found a receipt taped to the interior. It was from the same hydroponic supply store in Columbus, dated May 21st. The purchase included 100 plastic pots, 15 bags of growing medium, and a complete irrigation kit. The total was $1,206. The payment method was the same credit card ending in 7421. That's 3 receipts now, Paulson said. May, August, and a third one the forensics team may find inside. This person was maintaining the operation continuously, replacing nutrients, adjusting systems, monitoring conditions. Margaret observed the boarded window. The plywood covering was secured from the inside with what appeared to be 2x4 lumber bolted directly to the window frame. The bolts were recessed, their heads flush with the plywood surface. This was a person who understood construction, who understood securing a space against casual observation. A technician called out from the grow room. "We have something." Margaret and Paulson moved to the interior. The technician was pointing to the wall where the reflective mylar had been mounted. Behind one section of mylar, a previous occupant had written directly on the brick in what appeared to be pencil. The letters were barely visible, a pale shadow against the red surface. The technician photographed it. The writing read, 2847 B/RD/05-16. The date was May 16th, one day after the meter was installed. The initials matched those on the brass key. Paulson examined the notation with a photographer's light. He marked it for himself. A reference system, the address variant, his initials, the installation date. This wasn't a person exercising much caution. Over the following 2 hours, the forensics team collected samples. Nutrient solution residue from the floor, plastic shards from the damaged mylar, dust from the light mounting brackets, and the digital timer device itself. A video camera documented the layout of the space from every angle. Photographs were taken at overlapping focal lengths to establish scale. By 4:09 p.m., the building had been sealed. Yellow evidence tape was affixed to the boarded window and the rear door. A placard was posted on the front entrance. Crime scene. Do not enter. Paulson walked Margaret back to her car. The day had turned cloudy. A wind had picked up from the northwest, carrying the smell of approaching weather. "The credit card is the strongest lead," he said. It was cloned from a Dayton resident named Gregory Hoffman. The fraudulent charges occurred over 6 weeks. 3 transactions, all to the same supply store, all within a 90-mile radius. The store's transaction records will show which employee processed the payments. That employee might recognize the person who placed the orders. They might remember the vehicle. They might have security camera footage. "Has anyone spoken to the store yet?" Margaret asked. "That's happening tomorrow. I'm coordinating with the Dayton Police Fraud Unit. They have experience with this type of credit card cloning. The pattern suggests the card might have been compromised at a point-of-sale terminal, a gas station, a retail location. Someone with access to card reader data." They stood between their 2 vehicles. The wind moved through the bare branches of a nearby oak tree. A single leaf drifted down and came to rest on the asphalt. "There's also the matter of the building itself," Paulson continued. "The owner in Florida was easy to locate. But whoever had keys to the interior locks, that's a different question. Either they broke in initially and installed their own locks, or they had access through legitimate means. A property manager, a contractor, someone the owner trusted." Margaret thought about the building's history. She had walked past it on mail routes for years. She had observed it gradually boarding up, gradually becoming a void in the streetscape. "I'd like to know who lived here before," she said. Paulson made a note. "We can pull the tax assessor records. See if there were any recent tenants. The owner might have information about who had keys." Margaret drove home as the first drops of rain began to fall. The windshield wipers moved in a steady rhythm. Behind her, the building on Ashland Street receded in her mirrors, its boarded windows dark against the dimming sky. The investigation had expanded. 3 receipts, 3 transactions, a brand new identity line, the address variant, the initials, the date. But the person designated as RD remained absent from every physical space they had left behind. The notebook, the key, the electrical system, the water damage, all of it was evidence of presence. But the person who had been present was elsewhere now. Paulson called at 8:32 p.m. The hydroponic supply store in Columbus had been contacted. The manager, a man named Douglas Irwin, confirmed all 3 transactions. He remembered the customer. Male, approximately 30 to 35 years old, dark hair. He had always paid in cash after the first 2 visits. The 3rd transaction, the one in August, had been made using a credit card. The card was run by an employee named Trevor Halloway. Halloway remembers the customer specifically, Paulson said, because the customer asked unusual questions. He wanted to know if the store had security cameras. He wanted to know the delivery times for supply shipments. He asked if the manager was ever alone in the store. Margaret listened without speaking. The rain continued outside her window. The sound was regular, patient, methodical. "Trevor Halloway has been working at that store for 3 years," Paulson continued. "No criminal history. His background check was clean. But his supervisor says he's been acting strangely the past 2 weeks. He called in sick on September 26th and 27th. He hasn't shown up since September 28th. His apartment in Columbus is empty. He didn't give notice." Trevor Halloway's apartment was located in a 2-story complex on the east side of Columbus, approximately 43 miles from the building on Ashland Street. Officer Paulson arranged access through the property manager, a woman named Linda Hutchins who kept meticulous records. Halloway had signed a lease on March 12, 2026. His rent was $680 per month, paid consistently on the 1st of each month until September 1st. The October payment had not been received. Paulson arrived at the apartment on October 5th at 10:47 a.m. with 2 forensics technicians and a search warrant. Margaret observed from the doorway, remaining outside the threshold as instructed. The apartment was a studio, approximately 350 square feet. The front door opened directly into the main living space. A kitchenette occupied one corner. A single bed was positioned against the far wall. A desk sat beneath the only window, which overlooked the parking lot. The air inside was stale. No windows had been opened in at least 2 weeks. A faint odor persisted, not unpleasant, but chemical in nature. Paulson noted it immediately. "Acetone," one of the technicians said. She was wearing a mask, or something similar. Solvent-based. The desk was the first point of focus. Its surface contained a laptop computer, a desk lamp, and a stack of papers weighted down by a ceramic mug. The lamp was unplugged. The laptop was closed. Paulson photographed both items in situ before proceeding. The papers beneath the mug were bank statements. Paulson examined them without removing them from the surface. The statements spanned 4 months, June through September. Each statement showed consistent deposits of approximately $1,800 to $2,400, deposited via mobile app using a secondary account number. The originating account information was redacted. The bank statement only showed the receiving account, which matched Halloway's own checking account. Income from somewhere, Paulson observed. Regular, reliable, substantial. That's not store clerk wages. A technician photographed each bank statement from multiple angles, capturing the account numbers and dates clearly. The camera's flash reflected off the page lamination. The desk's single drawer contained writing instruments, 3 ballpoint pens, 2 pencils, and a mechanical pencil with leads still in the barrel. The pen caps were dust-free, recently used. Beneath the writing implements lay a small notebook, approximately 4 inches by 6 inches. Its pages were blank except for the first 3 sheets. Paulson opened the notebook carefully, using a pen to turn the pages rather than his fingers. The first page contained handwriting, notes written in what appeared to be blue ballpoint ink. The handwriting was different from that in the notebook found at the Ashland Street building. This script was neater, more controlled, with consistent spacing. The notes read, May 15th, connection activated. Meter reads clean. May 23rd, first cycle complete. Ready for scaling. June 1st, payment received from RD cash deposit. June 8th, second location confirmed. Address pending. June 15th, payment, $2,400. July 1st, payment, $2,400. August 3rd, supply run completed. Invoice attached. August 10th, payment, $2,400. September 1st, final cycle initiated. Harvest window October 5th to 12th. September 27th, meter disconnection confirmed. Protocol initiated. The second page contained what appeared to be a transaction log. Dates, amounts, and cryptic notations. All entries were dated between May 16th and September 27th. The amounts ranged from $800 to $2,400. A final notation at the bottom read, total, $18,600. The third page contained a single line. RD owes additional $4,200 for equipment replacement. Payment pending. Paulson photographed each page extensively. The camera captured not only the text, but also the indentations where the pen had pressed into the paper beneath, evidence that these notes had been written under some pressure with deliberation. A second technician was examining the kitchenette. The apartment's small refrigerator contained minimal contents: 3 bottles of water, a container of butter, and a single bottle of something labeled only with a handwritten label. The label read, Plant extract, do not consume. The bottle was sealed and appeared full. The technician photographed it and logged it as evidence. The cabinet beneath the sink contained cleaning supplies in their original packaging: unopened bottles of bleach, glass cleaner, and a box of latex gloves. Everything appeared new, recently purchased. The receipt taped to the interior of the cabinet was from a hardware store, dated September 26th. The purchase included bleach, gloves, a roll of plastic sheeting, and a container of hydrochloric acid labeled for industrial cleaning. The total was $67.43. Cleaning supplies, Paulson noted, purchased the day before he disappeared. Fresh stock. The bathroom contained a single bar of soap, a toothbrush and a holder, and a bottle of prescription medication. The label identified the medication as sertraline, prescribed to Trevor Halloway by a Dr. Patricia Weaver at a Columbus medical clinic. The prescription was dated August 15th. The bottle was approximately 3/4 full, consistent with taking 1 tablet daily for the preceding 6 weeks. The bed was made. The sheets were clean, recently washed. A single pillow sat at the head. A gray wool blanket was folded neatly across the foot. There were no personal items on the nightstand, no books, no items of daily use. The closet contained 7 shirts, all black or dark gray, 4 pairs of jeans, 2 pairs of work boots, a rain jacket. The clothing showed signs of regular wear, but no obvious staining or damage. Everything was hung or folded with deliberate precision. The laptop computer was brought to the evidence table. Paulson did not attempt to power it on or open it. The device would be examined at the police laboratory with proper protocols to preserve any encrypted data or forensic signatures. But one detail was observable without opening the machine: a small sticker on the case. It was a registration number for the retail store where Holloway had been employed. The sticker indicated the laptop had been purchased using an employee discount on June 2nd, 2026. 3 weeks after the meter was installed, Paulson said. 3 weeks after the operation started. He bought this laptop with his first substantial payment. Margaret observed the slow accumulation of physical facts. The apartment was not the residence of someone living a normal life. It was a way station, a place to sleep, to receive payments, to coordinate logistics. The man who occupied this space had a secondary existence, one that generated income approximately 4 times higher than his legitimate employment provided. Over the next 2 hours, the forensics team collected additional items: the notebook, the bank statements, the prescription bottle, the receipt from the hardware store, the bottle of plant extract. The laptop was placed in an evidence bag without activation. The desk lamp was photographed and its power cord documented. All items were logged with specific timestamps and case reference numbers. Before leaving, Paulson requested records from the property manager. Hutchins produced a rental file containing Holloway's application, his employment verification, and his payment history. The employment verification had been completed by the hydroponic supply store, listing Holloway's position as associate and his monthly income as $1,800. This figure had been corroborated at the time of the lease signing, but the bank statements from his apartment contradicted this claim. He had received far more income than $1,800 per month. The deposits occurred consistently on the first of each month, suggesting a formal arrangement with whoever was paying him. The money was being transferred electronically through mobile banking, which left a digital trail but revealed nothing about the source account. Paulson called the bank on October 5th at 3:28 p.m. He provided the warrant and requested information about the origin of the deposits. The bank's fraud department indicated they would need to file a separate request with the sending institution. The deposits were originating from an account at a different bank, located approximately 90 miles away. The process would take 2 to 3 business days. Margaret left the apartment at 4:15 p.m. The parking lot was half empty. Most spaces contained vehicles that appeared not to have moved in days: dusty windshields, flat tire profiles, residue from recent rain dried into permanent patterns on the glass. Paulson called her at 7:42 p.m. while she was at home. He had reviewed the prescription bottle. The medication had been prescribed for anxiety and depression. The prescription refill history showed that Holloway had been taking the same medication consistently since at least March. He was being treated for a psychiatric condition, Paulson said, but the treatment didn't prevent him from engaging in organized criminal activity. Sometimes these things coexist. The following morning, the bank contacted Paulson with the source account information. The deposits had been originating from an account held at a credit union in a town named Westbrook, located in rural eastern Ohio. The account was held under the name Richard Dutton. The initials matched. RD was a real person with a documented financial identity. Westbrook was a town of approximately 8,000 residents, situated in a county that bordered the state line. Paulson coordinated with the local sheriff's department. They were familiar with Richard Dutton. He owned a property approximately 12 miles outside of town, a rural parcel of 87 acres. The property contained a main residence and 2 outbuildings. Local records indicated he had owned the property for 9 years. Paulson requested records related to the property. The assessor's office provided tax documentation and structural permits. In 2019, Dutton had filed for a building permit to construct a utility storage structure on the eastern section of his property. The permit had been approved and the structure completed in 2020. No additional permits had been filed since. By October 7th, Paulson had coordinated with the Westbrook Sheriff's Department. A deputy named Marcus Webb agreed to conduct a preliminary observation of the property. No warrant had been obtained, so any visit would be limited to observation from the public right-of-way. Margaret agreed to accompany Paulson to Westbrook, a drive of approximately 2 hours. They departed at 8 a.m. on October 8th. The roads leading out of Columbus became progressively more rural. The density of buildings decreased. The spaces between houses expanded. By the time they reached the county line, the landscape consisted primarily of fields, forests, and occasional farmsteads set far back from the road. Deputy Webb met them at a crossroads near the Dutton property. He was a man in his mid-50s with a methodical manner of speaking. He had driven past the property that morning and observed nothing unusual. A pickup truck was parked near the main residence. No other vehicles were visible. The utility structure on the eastern section of the property was not accessible from the public road. It was situated approximately 200 yards into the property, beyond a tree line. "We can observe from the road access point," Webb said. "But beyond that, we need a warrant. And I'll be honest, getting a judge to sign off on a warrant for observation of a rural property based on circumstantial evidence of financial transfers is a challenge. We need something more direct." They drove slowly past the main residence. The house was a 2-story structure of wood siding, painted a faded blue. The foundation appeared sound. A propane tank was positioned on the north side of the structure. A clothesline, currently empty, extended from the rear corner. The road curved away from the residence. Approximately a quarter-mile further, a secondary access point became visible, a rough driveway that cut into the property. It was not gated, but a metal mailbox at the road's edge bore the address number and the name, R. Dutton, in reflective letters. Webb drove past the mailbox and parked the car at a distance where the driveway remained visible, but observation would be less obvious. They remained in the vehicle. "The utility structure is somewhere past those trees," Webb said, pointing to a dense stand of maple and oak approximately 200 yards from the road. From satellite imagery, it appears to be a large metal building, maybe 40 feet by 60 feet. But I haven't seen it in person. Margaret observed the landscape. The property was situated on a slight elevation. The surrounding terrain was relatively open, the tree line marking the boundary between cleared pasture and forest. The utility structure, if constructed as described, would have required significant site preparation. Heavy equipment would have been necessary. Access would be required repeatedly during construction and afterward for maintenance. "Has anyone checked electrical access to this property?" Margaret asked. Paulson and Webb exchanged a glance. "That's a good question," Paulson said. "Webb, is there a utility pole visible on the property?" Webb studied the landscape. "There's one at the edge of the main property line. It's part of the general utility corridor that runs along the road. But the connection to the residence versus any other structure wouldn't be visible from here." Paulson called the utility company in Westbrook. He asked about electrical service to the Dutton property. The utility records showed a single electrical account for the address. The account was active. The usage pattern showed consistent moderate consumption, with occasional spikes during heating season. Nothing suggested unusual demand comparable to what had been observed at the Ashland Street building. But that information was insufficient. If there was a second grow operation on this property, it could be isolated on a separate electrical system, solar panels, a generator, or a connection that was not officially documented. Margaret and Paulson remained at the observation point for approximately 90 minutes. During that time, No activity was observed at the residence or on the visible portions of the property. No vehicles arrived or departed. No individuals emerged from the buildings. At 10:53 a.m., a pickup truck pulled into the driveway. A man emerged, approximately 35 years old, dark hair, wearing work clothes. He walked to the mailbox, removed a bundle of mail, and returned to the truck. He drove up the private driveway toward the residence. The truck disappeared behind the tree line. "That's the vehicle I saw this morning," Webb said. "But I can't confirm that's Dutton himself." Paulson photographed the truck's license plate using a telephoto lens. The image captured the plate number clearly. Within minutes, he had contacted the State Motor Vehicle Registry. The truck was registered to Richard Dutton, age 36, residing at the Westbrook property. Webb placed a call to his department. He requested a background check on Richard Dutton. The results came back within 15 minutes. Dutton had no criminal history. He had a valid driver's license, current vehicle registration, and no outstanding warrants. His only documented interaction with law enforcement was a traffic citation from 2021 for expired vehicle registration tags. "He's clean on the surface," Webb said, "which means either he's careful or we don't have enough evidence yet." Paulson turned to Margaret. "I need to obtain a warrant to search that property. To do that, I need probable cause that ties Richard Dutton directly to the crime. Right now, I have his name on the brass key, his initials in the notebook, his name on the sending bank account, and his ownership of a property that could plausibly contain a second grow operation. But none of that is direct evidence of criminal activity. A good lawyer would dismantle this in court." Margaret considered the problem. "What about the building inspector's records? The utility structure he permitted in 2020. Has anyone inspected it since completion?" Webb nodded slowly. "That's a legitimate angle. A final inspection would have been required to close out the building permit. We can request that documentation." The county building department records were obtained that afternoon. The initial building permit for the utility storage structure had been inspected and approved on November 3, 2020. The inspector's report noted that the structure met all code requirements for a storage building. Dimensions were 42 feet by 60 feet. Ventilation systems were adequate. Electrical connections appeared proper. But the inspector's narrative contained a detail. Structure interior contains temporary wooden shelving units. Purpose stated as general storage. Electrical service appears to be from a dedicated line routed through eastern property boundary. A dedicated electrical line, separate from the main residence service. That detail had been documented 4 years earlier and then filed away. Paulson contacted the utility company again. This time, he asked specifically about secondary electrical connections to the Dutton property. After a record search that took 30 minutes, the utility representative reported that there was indeed a second electrical account opened in 2020 associated with the same property address. The account had been inactive until March 15, 2026. On that date, it had been activated. Since March, the account had shown consumption patterns ranging from 4,000 to 9,500 kilowatt-hours per month. The activation date was 3 days before the meter in the suburban Ohio building had been installed. The consumption pattern was nearly identical to what had occurred at the Ashland Street location. Paulson received this information at 2:17 p.m. on October 8th. By 3:30 p.m., he had submitted a request to the county judge for a search warrant. The application cited the electrical service records, the financial transfers to Trevor Halloway, the evidence recovered from the Ashland Street building, and the matching initials and name. The judge approved the warrant at 4:45 p.m. Deputy Webb received a call at 5:12 p.m. The search was scheduled for 8 a.m. the following morning. Additional officers would be present. The county sheriff's department was coordinating with state police narcotics units. The structure on Dutton's property was consistent with an indoor cultivation facility. Approach would be cautious. Margaret and Paulson remained in Westbrook that evening. They stayed in a motel adjacent to the county courthouse. The room was standard: 2 beds, a small bathroom, a television mounted on the wall. Neither of them slept much. At 6:30 a.m. on October 9th, they received a text message from Webb. Proceeding as planned. Standing by. They arrived at the property access point at 7:45 a.m. 3 sheriff's vehicles were already present, parked along the road shoulder. 5 officers stood near the driveway, checking equipment and conferring in low voices. Paulson identified himself and introduced Margaret as a witness to the original complaint. At 8:02 a.m., the convoy proceeded up the driveway. The private road curved through the tree line for approximately 400 yards. As the elevation rose, the utility structure became visible. It was indeed a large metal building. Unpainted steel, approximately 40 by 60 feet as documented. The roof was a single pitch, angled toward the north. 2 metal doors were visible on the eastern face. All windows had been covered with opaque panels. The building appeared well maintained. No rust was visible. The concrete pad surrounding it showed no cracks or settlement. This was a structure that had been built properly and maintained consistently. Deputy Webb approached the main doors with 2 other officers. The doors were padlocked from the outside, identical padlocks to those found at the Ashland Street building. The lock mechanisms were secured with what appeared to be a heavy-duty hasp system bolted directly to the metal frame. The padlocks on the utility structure yielded to bolt cutters at 8:09 a.m. The doors swung open to reveal an interior illuminated by natural light filtering through gaps in the opaque panels. Deputy Webb entered first, his hand resting on his belt. The other officers remained positioned at the entrance. What they found was not an active grow operation. The structure was empty. The concrete floor bore the same pattern of grooves and water damage visible at the Ashland Street building. Mounting brackets remained on the walls where lights had been attached. The electrical infrastructure was intact: heavy-gauge conduit, surge protectors, timer systems. But all the equipment, all the plants, all evidence of recent occupation had been removed. Paulson walked the perimeter methodically. The structure contained 2 rooms, separated by a wall of plastic sheeting that had been partially dismantled. In the rear room, he observed the same layering of mylar panels, the same residual mineral deposits on concrete, the same configuration of irrigation channels. A single object remained on the floor of the rear chamber. It was a metal clipboard, its surface rusted at the corners. The papers attached to it had warped from exposure to humidity, but the text was still legible. Paulson photographed the clipboard in place before retrieving it. The papers comprised a maintenance log, dated from March 16th through September 24th. Entries appeared weekly, documenting temperature, humidity, nutrient solution levels, and plant growth observations. The handwriting was controlled and consistent, different from both the notebook found at Trevor Halloway's apartment and the one recovered from the Ashland Street building. The final entry read, "Final harvest complete. Equipment removal scheduled 09-28. Transfer to secondary location pending." Secondary location. That notation suggested another facility, another operation, another geographic point in a network that extended beyond what had been discovered. Margaret observed Paulson's expression. His jaw tightened slightly, the only visible indication that the investigation had not concluded but instead expanded. The structure was secured as a crime scene. A preliminary search by narcotics officers revealed no residual plant material, no chemical compounds, no evidence of recent activity. Whatever had been cultivated here had been completely removed and disposed of. The operation had been professional, methodical, and anticipatory. By noon, Paulson, Margaret, and Webb had returned to the county sheriff's office in Westbrook. A conference room was prepared. The evidence collected from the apartment, the Ashland Street building, and now the rural property was organized on a long table. Notebooks, receipts, bank statements, photographs, the maintenance log. Paulson spent the afternoon on telephone calls. He contacted the FBI's field office in Columbus regarding the interstate nature of the operation, the properties in Ohio, and the utility fraud spanning multiple jurisdictions. He spoke with narcotics agents about known grow operations in the region. He requested additional bank records from both Trevor Holloway and Richard Dutton. At 3:47 p.m., a new document arrived via email. It was a complete transaction history for Richard Dutton's credit union account, spanning the past 2 years. Paulson printed it and spread the pages across the table. Margaret observed as he reviewed each page. The pattern became evident quickly. Beginning in January 2025, regular payments had been deposited into Dutton's account from an external source. The deposits averaged $2,100 per month. They occurred on the 15th of each month, automatically transferred through an ACH system. The originating account was held at another credit union, this one located in Pennsylvania, approximately 70 miles away. The account holder's name appeared in the routing information, Lancaster Feed and Supply, LLC. A feed company, Paulson said. That's the cover entity. He requested information about Lancaster Feed and Supply. The company registration showed it was a legitimate agricultural business, established in 2015, with a physical location in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The registered agent was listed as James Pettigrew. Pettigrew, Paulson repeated. That name doesn't appear anywhere in this investigation. But Margaret observed something on the table. She pointed to the maintenance log from the rural property. Paulson had photographed the signature at the bottom of the final entry. It was accompanied by a date, September 24th, and initials. The initials were JP. Paulson retrieved the photograph. He enlarged it on his laptop screen. The initials were clearly visible, written in the same controlled handwriting that characterized the entire log. He made a call to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The feed supply company answered. Paulson identified himself and asked to speak with James Pettigrew. The receptionist indicated that Pettigrew had not been in the office since September 24th. His sudden absence had been treated as a personal matter. No forwarding contact information had been left. Paulson requested basic employment records and a physical description. The company provided an address on file and a photograph from the employee directory. James Pettigrew, age 52, dark hair graying at the temples, employed as operations manager for the past 6 years. Margaret looked at the photograph. It was the same man she had observed in the parking lot of the rural property, the one who had retrieved mail at 10:53 a.m. But the photograph bore a different name, Richard Dutton. Paulson studied the image for a prolonged moment. Then he turned to his laptop and searched the county records for James Pettigrew. The results indicated that Pettigrew owned property in the Westbrook area, the same rural parcel, purchased 9 years earlier under a different entity name, since transferred to Dutton. He's operating under 2 identities, Margaret said quietly. Paulson nodded. Richard Dutton is the legal owner of the property. James Pettigrew is the operations manager of the feed company. Same person, 2 names, 2 financial tracks. He made additional calls. The credit union in Pennsylvania confirmed that the feed company's account was held under the business name, with James Pettigrew as the authorized signatory. The business had been established to provide a legitimate income stream into a bank account. That account then transferred funds to Richard Dutton in Ohio. But the source of the original deposits to Lancaster Feed and Supplies account required further investigation. Those deposits were themselves coming from multiple sources, small amounts from various accounts scattered across the eastern United States. Gardening supply stores, hydroponics retailers, even a nursery in North Carolina. Each amount was small enough to avoid triggering reporting requirements, but collectively they represented a significant revenue stream. It was, Margaret realized, a sophisticated money laundering operation disguised as a legitimate business. The deposits represented proceeds from multiple grow operations, routed through the feed company to create an appearance of legitimacy, then distributed to the property owner in Ohio. Paulson made a call to the FBI. An agent named Thomas Cresswell agreed to take the case. The interstate financial transfers, the money laundering structure, and the apparent cultivation network constituted federal crimes. An investigation was initiated, but the critical piece remained elusive. How had Trevor Halloway become involved? What connected a 28-year-old employee at a hydroponic supply store in Columbus to an operation spanning 3 states and controlled by a man using 2 identities? The answer came from an unexpected source. Paulson received a call on October 10th from the Dayton Police Fraud Unit. They had been investigating the cloned credit card used in the hydroponic supply purchases. The fraud had originated from a point-of-sale terminal at a gas station in Columbus. The store's security footage from that date, July 8th, showed a transaction occurring at the checkout counter. The cashier processing the transaction was Trevor Halloway. Paulson reviewed the footage. It showed Halloway handing a credit card to a customer, processing the payment, then handing the card back. But the timestamp indicated the transaction took approximately 90 seconds, longer than a normal purchase. The camera angle did not capture the exact movements of Halloway's hands. What it did capture was a second transaction, processed 30 seconds later by a different cashier, using the same credit card. That second transaction was approved. Halloway's transaction was declined. The card was flagged as suspicious. The gas station's manager explained that Halloway had requested a shift change shortly after this date. He had wanted to work nights instead of days. The manager had accommodated the request. Paulson sat in the conference room, reviewing these details alongside the notebook entries from Halloway's apartment. The financial dependency was now clear. Halloway had been skimming credit card data at the gas station, a relatively simple process for a person with access to payment terminals. He had passed that data to Richard Dutton. Dutton had used the clone cards to purchase cultivation equipment, establishing the operation. But Halloway's role had extended beyond card skimming. He had also been employed at the hydroponic supply store, the same store where Dutton was apparently a regular customer. Halloway had served as a conduit, gathering information about supply deliveries, store security, and inventory systems. His questions to other employees, relayed through store manager Douglas Irwin, had been reconnaissance, gathering intelligence for the larger operation. The notebook in Halloway's apartment documented this relationship. The payments of $1,800 to $2,400 per month were not random deposits. Paulson examined the bank statements again. Each deposit correlated precisely with a week in which Halloway had worked the night shift at the gas station. Halloway had been compensated for his role. He had moved money through his own account, making it appear as legitimate income, helping to obscure the source of funds. He had been a junior partner in what Margaret now understood was a sophisticated criminal enterprise, one that had expanded to multiple states and multiple cultivation sites. The disappearance of Halloway on September 28th now made sense. When Margaret had discovered the fraudulent utility connection and the investigation had begun, Dutton had moved quickly to contain the operation. The Ashland Street building had been shut down and stripped. Holloway had been instructed to clean his apartment, purchase cleaning supplies, and disappear. Paulson placed calls to the state police and FBI field office. He requested that Holloway be added to a wanted persons list. The young man's vehicle, a 2019 Honda Civic, registered to an address in Columbus, had been located abandoned at a bus station in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, on September 29th. Holloway had run, but Dutton remained, apparently confident that his use of a second identity and his separation from the actual grow operations would shield him from direct prosecution. Paulson reviewed the maintenance log one final time. He examined the signature, JP, and then he examined the photograph from the feed company in Pennsylvania. He cross-referenced the employee records, the purchase history, the property ownership documents. The synthesis occurred at 4:23 p.m. on October 10th, as Paulson sat alone in the conference room. He understood now not just what had occurred, but why. James Pettigrew had worked legitimately for a feed company for 6 years. The position had been stable, but not particularly remunerative. Pettigrew had been 51 years old, middle-aged, without significant assets or retirement savings. His prospects for advancement were limited. Richard Dutton existed as a parallel identity, created to own property and maintain a second life. The construction of the utility building in 2020, initially presented as legitimate storage, had been the foundation for an expansion into cultivation. The operation had remained undetected for years because Dutton maintained two completely separate lives. One as the feed company manager in Pennsylvania, one as a property owner in rural Ohio. The introduction of Trevor Holloway represented a calculated decision to scale the operation. Holloway's access to credit card data and his position at a retail supplier had made him valuable. The financial compensation, $18,600 over 4 months, had been an investment in a younger associate who could serve as operational staff while Dutton remained insulated. But the operation had become careless. The second utility connection in suburban Ohio had been established without sufficient anonymity. The credit card fraud had been sloppy. Holloway had begun asking questions and leaving traces. The entire network had been vulnerable to discovery if any single thread was pulled. So when Margaret Hollis pulled that thread by discovering the fraudulent utility account, Dutton had moved into containment mode. Shut down the Ashland Street operation. Remove all evidence. Eliminate the junior partner. Margaret observed Paulson's expression. He looked tired, not from any physical exertion, but from the weight of understanding. He had connected the paper trail. He could now articulate the full scope of what had occurred. 3 separate cultivation facilities operating simultaneously, a money laundering structure disguised as a legitimate business, a junior associate drawn into criminality through financial incentive, and a mastermind operating under an assumed identity while maintaining a legitimate employment record. Paulson made notes in a formal report. He documented the timeline. He cross-referenced the physical evidence to the financial records. He established the probable connections. Dutton had established the grow operations. Holloway had provided technical support and reconnaissance. The cultivation had been coordinated through the maintenance logs. The proceeds had been laundered through the feed company account. At 5:18 p.m., Paulson called FBI agent Thomas Cresswell. He provided a comprehensive summary of the investigation, the connections, and the probable perpetrators. Cresswell indicated that federal charges would be filed against Richard Dutton for interstate money laundering, fraud, and controlled substance cultivation. A federal warrant would be issued. Dutton would be apprehended within 48 hours. Trevor Holloway remained a fugitive, wanted for fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to controlled substance crimes. Margaret and Paulson left the conference room at 6:05 p.m. The sun was already low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the parking lot. The investigation had resolved itself not through dramatic revelation, but through the patient accumulation of facts, the logical connection of two identities to a single person, and the recognition that professional criminals often create parallel lives to maintain operational security. Paulson turned to Margaret before they departed. "You noticed something in that maintenance log that I almost missed," he said. "The pattern of initials." That observation was the critical turn. Margaret considered this. She had observed the details, the signatures, the dates, the consistency of handwriting. But the actual connection had been Paulson's work, his systematic cross-referencing of names and identities. "He lived two lives," Margaret said. "One legitimate, one criminal. Both documented, both traceable, if someone looked closely enough at the margins." "That's how most people are caught," Paulson replied. "Not through dramatic revelation, but through the small detail they didn't think mattered. A signature on a log, a photograph in a personnel file, the overlap between two identities that should never have intersected." They drove back to Ohio in separate vehicles, following the route that curved through rural landscape and then back into the progressively denser geography of suburban development. The sun descended behind the horizon. The sky transitioned from orange to purple to dark. Margaret thought about the retired postal worker whose electricity bill had been the catalyst for this investigation. Margaret Hollis had noticed something was wrong. She had pulled the thread, and in pulling it, she had exposed a network of fraud, cultivation, and money laundering that had extended across 3 states. The investigation was not yet concluded. Dutton remained at large for another day. Holloway's location was unknown, but the critical work, the identification, the documentation, the logical synthesis of evidence, had been completed. The paper trail had been followed. The connections had been made. The truth, mundane and grounded in physical reality, had been determined. Third story. A landlord in Portland entered one of her rental units for a routine inspection and found a second family living in the basement, a mother and 2 children who'd been renting the illegal sublet from the original tenant for 9 months. The original tenant had disappeared weeks earlier, still collecting rent from the basement dwellers through an email account they'd never met in person. The landlord had called it in at 2:53 p.m. on a Tuesday. By 4:15 p.m., Detective Sarah Brennan was standing in the main floor kitchen of the Laurel Hill property, her notebook open to a blank page. The Portland PD dispatcher had logged it as unlicensed occupancy with potential fraud. Nothing yet indicated a crime beyond the obvious civil matter. She descended the basement stairs. The space smelled of detergent and something else, a metallic undertone, faint but distinct. Copper, possibly, or old coin. The air was cool and deliberately still. The basement had been divided into 2 rooms with drywall. The family's space, mother and 2 children, contained a mattress on the floor, a plastic storage container, a camping stove, 3 toothbrushes in a cup. "No running water down here," Brennan observed. They would have used the upstairs bathroom, which meant they'd move through the main house regularly. The landlord confirmed this. They'd been given a key to the kitchen, told to use those facilities only. Brennan photographed the storage container's contents. Inside, a photocopy of a lease agreement dated 9 months prior, signed by someone named Derek Paulson. The signature appeared rushed, the P looping unnaturally. Beneath it lay 7 envelopes, each containing $800 in cash, each envelope dated at intervals of precisely 30 days. The dates ranged from 6 months back to 3 weeks prior. Each bore a handwritten notation, month rent plus utilities. The cash itself was notable. The bills showed no consecutive serial numbers. The denominations varied, 420s, 250s, 610s, per envelope, as if assembled from different sources rather than withdrawn in sequence from a single account. Brennan bagged the envelopes and the lease copy. She photographed the mattress, noting a water stain in one corner, consistent with recent use, but no obvious sign of damage or intrusion. The camping stove showed residue in the burner wells, coffee, probably, and something granular. She collected a sample. In the adjacent room, which the landlord identified as Derek Paulson's original rental space, the environment shifted. Here lay evidence of habitation, but strange in its incompleteness. A sleeping bag, unzipped and laid flat. A laptop, dead battery, sitting atop a plastic crate. Two suitcases, both empty and open as if abandoned mid-packing. Brennan powered the laptop using her portable charger. The machine took 14 minutes to boot. When it did, the screen showed a login prompt. She did not attempt to access it. That would require a warrant and the IT unit. Instead, she examined the physical machine. The keyboard showed where on the W, A, S, D keys, directional navigation, common in gaming, or simply frequent typing. The trackpad bore a faint chemical residue, barely visible under the overhead fluorescent. She swabbed it. On the floor beside the crate, a receipt. Home Depot, dated 8 weeks prior. 2 items, interior door hardware kit and door frame shim set. The purchase time was 7:51 a.m. The cashier's initials were illegible. Brennan checked the basement door frame. The hinges were original to the house. She could see the paint overspray from earlier decades, but the strike plate and latch assembly appeared newer. The wood around the strike showed fresh gouges, as if the door had been forced repeatedly before the new hardware was installed. The shims mentioned in the receipt were visible now that she looked closely, thin wooden wedges inserted above and below the frame to adjust its angle. Why would a tenant reinstall basement door hardware? She moved upstairs, back to the main floor. The landlord had provided the property's rental history. Derek Paulson's lease began 9 months prior, for a 12-month term, $1,200 per month. The payments had arrived by electronic transfer for the first 3 months, then stopped. The landlord had begun sending notices in week 1 of the 4th month. No response. By month 6, she decided to check the property in person. Brennan requested bank records for the account Paulson had listed. The transfers, when they arrived, showed 4 deposits of $1,200, each originating from an account held by someone named Michael Thornton, a name not mentioned anywhere else in the file. The bank notation on each transfer read only rent, nothing more. At the kitchen table, Brennan laid out the timeline. Paulson rents. 3 months of legitimate payments from Thornton's account. Payments cease. Paulson, presumably, begins subletting the basement to the family at $800 per month instead of his $1,200 obligation to the landlord, pocketing the difference. But where does the cash come from? The family had produced envelopes of physical currency, not transfers, not checks. Brennan examined the kitchen itself. A landline phone hung on the wall, old, barely functional. The call log showed the last incoming call at 8:23 p.m., 37 days prior. The number was blocked, marked only as private. No outgoing calls recorded in the past month. She photographed the phone. She photographed the call log display. In the hallway closet, cleaning supplies and a jacket. The jacket bore a name tag, Derek Paulson. Beneath it, a maintenance uniform, dark gray with a logo for Pacific Northwest Facilities Management. The uniform was dry, wrinkled, abandoned. Inside the jacket pocket, a key card with a magnetic strip and a 7-digit code, 841502. Beside it, a receipt from a coffee stand, dated 3 weeks prior, 6:23 a.m. The name printed on the order was D. Paul. A shortened version, or an abbreviation. The receipt notation indicated tall Americano, extra shot, room for milk. The purchase location was downtown Portland, near the waterfront. Brennan photographed the key card. She entered the code into the database and waited. Facilities Management System returned a location. Pacific Northwest Facilities Management maintained contracts at the Lloyd Center, the Old Town Chinatown District, and 3 office complexes in the Pearl District. The card had last been scanned at 5:47 a.m., 23 days prior, at the Pearl District location, Pacific Northwest Building, 1022 Northwest Lovejoy Street. She noted the time, 5:47 a.m., an hour before the coffee purchase downtown, which made geographic sense if he'd swiped into the Pearl office and then moved to the waterfront cafe afterward. But the swipe records showed no outgoing scan at that location. The card had been swiped in, but never out. The system flagged a door held open notation at 6:04 a.m., suggesting someone had propped the door or bypassed the mechanism manually. Brennan sat in the basement again, the cooler air against her skin. 7 envelopes of cash, dated at regular intervals, all signed by someone named Derek Paulson, who maintained a key card he'd stopped using 3 weeks ago, who'd abandoned his rental entirely, who'd been collecting rent from a family he'd never met, conducted entirely through email. She pulled the lease copy again. The signature, that rushed, looping P, caught her attention once more. She placed it beside the name tag from the jacket. The handwriting did not match. The name tag bore neat, printed letters, Paulson. The lease bore cursive, pressed hard into the paper, the pressure visible even in the photocopy's grain. Different hands, different people, or one person, forcing themselves to sign in an unfamiliar style. Brennan made a note. Asterisk verify signature. Comparison sample needed. Asterisk. She called the landlord. Did you ever meet Derek Paulson in person? A pause. No. He completed the application online. The lease was signed electronically. He uploaded a scan. I never required him to appear. Brennan asked for the email address used for rental communications. The landlord provided it. Derek.Paulson.1987@mail.service. A generic provider, a common name, impossible to trace without a warrant. She descended to the basement one more time. In the corner where the family had stored their belongings, near the water-stained mattress, she noticed something she'd overlooked, a smudge on the wall. She approached it. The smudge was dark, metallic-looking, roughly circular, perhaps 5 centimeters in diameter. She swabbed it. The smell she detected upon entering, that copper undertone, was stronger here. Brennan stood motionless in the center of the basement, her notebook open, her observations accumulating in measured, unemotional sentences. The empty space around her held its quiet. The overhead lights hummed. She could hear the house settling, the pipes dormant in the walls. Derek Paulson had never existed as a tenant. Michael Thornton had paid rent through someone else's identity, then stopped. Cash was collected from a family kept in darkness and isolation. A key card suggested access to office buildings. A door frame had been reinforced, suggesting forced entry. And now, chemical residue on a wall, and a smudge that glowed faintly under the alternative light source Brennan retrieved from her kit. She photographed it carefully, measuring nothing, describing only what appeared before her eyes. The smudge fluoresced faintly under the UV light, a deep purple, consistent with the presence of semen or saliva or other bodily fluids. She bagged it as evidence, her movements methodical, her mind registering only the physical facts. The basement remained silent. The house held its secrets in the spaces between rooms. The lab results arrived on Thursday morning. The swab from the basement wall returned positive for human saliva, type B blood. The residue from the camping stove burner contained traces of ferric oxide and copper sulfate, components of certain industrial cleaning compounds, not food residue. The chemical smudge on the laptop trackpad matched the composition of latex, degraded, consistent with a gloved hand that had begun to deteriorate. Detective Marcus Howell reviewed the findings in the Portland PD's evidence room. He was methodical in his approach, documenting each observation in his file before moving to the next. The case was shifting now from simple fraud into territory that required deliberate excavation. He obtained a warrant for the Pacific Northwest Facilities Management Company records. By Friday afternoon, he had access to their personnel files and access logs for the Pearl District location. Derek Paulson did not appear in their employment roster. Michael Thornton did, hired 8 months prior, position listed as night maintenance, hourly wages, no direct deposit arrangement. Thornton had provided an address in Northeast Portland that, when verified, returned a vacant lot. The phone number he'd listed connected to a disconnected line. The access log showed Thornton's key card had been scanned 247 times over his 8-month employment period. The pattern was consistent. Early morning entries between 5:30 and 6:15 a.m., exits between 7:45 and 8:35 a.m. But beginning 6 weeks prior, the exits stopped being recorded. Instead, the log showed door held open notifications at irregular intervals, sometimes within minutes of entry, sometimes after an hour had elapsed. Howell cross-referenced those dates with the basement family's rent envelope schedule. Of the 7 envelopes Brennan had collected, 5 were dated within 48 hours of a door-held open notification at the Pearl District building. He drove to the location. Pacific Northwest Building was a 7-story office structure completed in 1998, housing law offices, accounting firms, 2 dental practices, and a consulting group on the 4th floor. The ground floor entry utilized a standard magnetic lock system with backup keypad access. Howell spoke with the building manager, a woman named Patricia Givens, who logged all maintenance requests and coordinated with the facilities company. Givens provided the work orders for the past 8 months. Thornton's name appeared on none of them. However, the log showed that between 5:15 and 7:45 a.m. on certain dates, the building experienced system anomalies, fire doors propped open, security camera feeds going blank for 20 to 30 minutes at a stretch, and on 3 separate occasions, HVAC systems cycling unexpectedly. Howell photographed the security camera logs. The feed blackouts occurred on dates matching 5 of the 7 rent envelope dates. He requested the backup security files, which would be stored on a separate server at the facilities company's main office. The request was logged. He descended to the building's basement mechanical room. Here, the air smelled of machine oil and something else, a sharp, acrid odor, almost chemical in nature. The room contained boilers, water heaters, the HVAC system, and electrical panels. On the floor near the electrical panel, Howell observed a small fragment, plastic, dark gray, approximately 2 centimeters long, with a clean break as if snapped or cut recently. He photographed it and bagged it. The electrical panel itself bore evidence of tampering. The cover plate had been removed multiple times, judging by the scratch marks around the fastener holes. The marks were fresh, the exposed metal beneath showing no oxidation. Howell did not open the panel. That required a licensed electrician. Instead, he documented the scratches and photographed the interior wiring visible through the gaps in the cover. On a workbench adjacent to the panel, he found 3 items: a pen, a small notebook, and a laminated card. The pen bore no markings. The notebook was blank, all pages untouched. The laminated card displayed building blueprints, floor layouts for all 7 stories, with electrical systems annotated. The card bore no owner information, no name, no ID number. It was a schematic card, the type used by contractors or facilities staff with authorized building access. Howell photographed all 3 items in situ, then bagged them. The building manager, when questioned again, confirmed that such schematic cards existed but were tracked and issued only to vetted contractors. She would verify whether Thornton had been issued one, though she noted that all issued cards were supposed to be returned upon termination or employment completion. Howell drove to the Northeast Portland address listed in Thornton's employment file, despite knowing it would be vacant. The lot was indeed empty, a cleared space between 2 commercial buildings, overgrown with weeds and littered with construction debris. He photographed the coordinates and noted them. That evening, he returned to the rental property on Laurelhast. The basement felt different now, charged with purposeful investigation. Howell brought a portable ultraviolet light and examined every surface the family had occupied. The mattress fluoresced under the UV spectrum in 3 locations, one at each end and one in the center, consistent with repeated contact over an extended period. He photographed each spot. He examined the doorframe again, the one reinforced with new hardware and shims. The wood around the strike plate showed microfractures, patterns consistent with significant force applied from the exterior. The shims were wedged tightly, suggesting the frame had been deliberately warped to create binding or increase security. Howell pulled up the Home Depot receipt again. The purchase had been made at the southeast location, 7:51 a.m., paid in cash. He requested the security footage for that date, knowing it was now 8 weeks old and likely archived. The request would take time. In the main floor kitchen, he examined the landline phone more carefully. The device was a standard model, probably from the early 2000s. The handset bore smudges, consistent with heavy use. He swabbed the handset and the numeric keypad, focusing on the keys that would be most frequently used in dialing. The numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 0. The kitchen itself smelled of cleaning products, recently applied. The landlord had mentioned coming in after discovering the family, attempting to clean before the police arrived. Howell noted the thoroughness of the cleaning, too thorough, perhaps. The floor showed no dust, no accumulated grime. The sink had been scoured. Even the grout between tiles appeared recently refreshed. But in the pantry, on the top shelf, behind a box of instant oatmeal, he found a piece of paper. He removed it with gloved hands. It was a printout, partially faded, bearing a partial email address and what appeared to be banking information. The text was smudged but legible in parts. On point 1987 ad. And below it, a partial account number ending in 7342. The document had been folded multiple times and bore water stains along one edge. Howell photographed it carefully and bagged it as evidence. He sat at the kitchen table and opened his notebook. The timeline was becoming more complex. Michael Thornton had been employed or claimed employment 8 months prior. Derek Paulson's lease began 9 months prior. The overlap was 1 month. For 3 months, rent had been paid legitimately to the landlord from Thornton's account. Then the payments stopped. The basement door had been reinforced 8 weeks ago, consistent with the family's arrival and the need to secure them in place without visible locks that the landlord might observe. The access card showed Thornton had continued to enter the Pearl District building for weeks after his legitimate employment should have ended, suggesting he retained the card illegally or had duplicates made. The door held open. Notifications at the building corresponded with rent payment dates. The building experienced system anomalies, electrical, HVAC, security, on those same dates. The basement camping stove bore residue from industrial compounds, not domestic cooking materials. And in the mechanical room of an office building, Someone had taken the time to leave behind blueprints and equipment, or forgotten them in haste. Howell stood and walked through the house again, slowly observing. The rental property was unremarkable, standard construction, standard finishes, the type of house that blended into thousands of others in Portland. But it had served as a location for something. The basement had held people in isolation. The main floor had been cleaned meticulously, and somewhere in the system of cash envelopes and email addresses and abandoned key cards, a theft had occurred. He had not yet determined what had been stolen, but the physical evidence suggested it was significant enough to demand the infrastructure of a false identity, false employment, access to secured buildings, and the systematic confinement of witnesses. He made a note to request the office building's inventory records for the past 8 months. He needed to know what, if anything, had been removed. The house was quiet around him. Outside, Portland's Friday evening traffic moved along the streets, indifferent and distant. The office building's inventory records revealed the theft on Monday morning. 4 high-resolution digital projectors, model Epson EB2250U, valued at $3,200 each. 8 units of commercial-grade uninterruptible power supply equipment, each weighing approximately 40 kilograms. Networking equipment, routers, switches, managed PoE devices, totaling roughly $18,000 in retail value, all listed as missing during a physical audit conducted on the 31st of the previous month. The audit had been performed by the building's IT contractor, a firm called Cascade Technical Solutions. Their report noted that the items had been present during a routine maintenance visit 2 weeks prior, but absent during the final quarterly check. The timeline placed the disappearance between the 23rd and 31st, a 9-day window. Howell cross-referenced those dates with the access logs. Thornton's key card had been swiped on the 24th, 26th, 28th, and 30th. On the 28th, the door held open notation appeared at 6:27 a.m., maintained for 34 minutes. On the 30th, the same pattern. Entry at 5:52 a.m., door held open from 6:18 a.m. until 7:04 a.m. The security camera feed showed no footage for those time windows. According to the building manager, the blackouts corresponded with scheduled maintenance windows. The backup systems had been powered down for firmware updates on both dates. Howell obtained the maintenance work orders. Neither date matched any scheduled maintenance activity. The firmware updates had not been performed until 3 days after the 30th, after the theft had already been discovered. He requested the electrical contractor's records. The contractor who had performed the supposed firmware updates was a company called Premier Building Systems, registered in Washington State. Their license was active, but their physical address was a mail forwarding service in Tacoma. A phone call to the number listed returned a disconnected recording. Howell sat with the crime scene photographs spread across his desk. The projectors and networking equipment would have required transportation. They were not items that could be carried easily or concealed. The weight alone suggested multiple trips or assistance. The building's loading dock was monitored by a separate camera system, which Howell had already reviewed. No footage showed the removal of such equipment, but the basement at the Laurel Hill property remained an open question. 3 individuals had been confined there for 9 months. The mother, when interviewed by Brennan, had provided limited information. She'd been contacted through an online advertisement for affordable housing. The communication had been entirely electronic. She'd been told to arrive at the house on a specific date, to bring minimal belongings, and to remain in the basement. She'd been told the arrangement was temporary, that legitimate housing would be secured within a few months. The rent, $800 per month, was paid through the envelopes. She'd never seen Derek Paulson or Michael Thornton. She'd never seen anyone except the landlord. during the inspection that had exposed the arrangement. Howell reviewed the online advertisement. It had been posted on a housing platform, removed within days of discovery, but cached by the search engines. The listing described a private basement apartment with utilities included, discreet landlord, and no background check required. It had been reposted 4 times over the 9 months, each time under a different account name. He obtained the IP addresses associated with the postings. All 4 originated from a single location, the downtown Portland Library's public internet access, logged at times ranging from 2:14 p.m. to 5:33 p.m., dates consistent with afternoons when the building would be moderately populated. The library's security footage for those dates would be available, but the volume was substantial. Howell submitted a request to the IT division to narrow the time frame based on network activity logs. He returned to the Home Depot receipt from the door hardware purchase. The timing was precise. 8 weeks prior, 7:51 a.m., Southeast Portland location, paid in cash. He'd already submitted a request for security footage. On Tuesday, the digital files arrived. Howell reviewed the footage in 45-minute segments. At 7:48 a.m., a figure entered the Southeast Home Depot location through the front entrance. The footage showed a male, mid-30s to early 40s, approximately 5 feet 10 inches to 5 feet 11 inches, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. He proceeded directly to the hardware section and selected the door hardware kit and shim set within 4 minutes. The transaction occurred at Register 7 at 7:51 a.m., exactly as the receipt indicated. The figure paid with cash, a stack of bills handed to the cashier without counting. The cashier, visible in the footage, appeared to count approximately $400 before opening the register. The figure departed at 7:54 a.m., carrying a single Home Depot bag. Howell froze the footage at the clearest angle of the face. The image was grainy but distinguishable. He ran it through facial recognition software maintained by the Portland PD, cross-referencing against employment records from Pacific Northwest Facilities Management, the office building tenant directories, and background photographs from the property tax assessor's office. No matches returned. He widened the search parameters to include all persons photographed within the Pearl District building during the 8-month window when Thornton's access card had been active. Still no matches. The figure in the Home Depot footage remained unidentified. Howell examined the partial email printout discovered in the kitchen pantry. The document appeared to be a fragment of a larger communication, possibly a forwarded message or a printed email thread. He sent it to the lab for fingerprint analysis and ink composition testing. The results came back Friday afternoon. 1 partial fingerprint was recovered from the paper, insufficient for identification against the database. The ink composition matched standard thermal printer output, the type used by commercial printers in office environments or by ATM machines. Howell reviewed the office building's internal printer logs. Cascade Technical Solutions, the IT contractor, maintained an account on the building's main printer system. Their access log showed regular activity, but also showed that on the 28th, between 6:15 a.m. and 7:15 a.m., the printer had been accessed by an account identified only as temp_contractor. The account had printed 37 pages. The activity log provided no additional details about the document titles or destinations. Howell requested the physical paper trail from the building's waste management. The trash from that date had been collected and removed to a waste facility in Gresham. Recovery would be possible, but would require coordination with the facility and extensive sorting of mixed commercial waste. He instead focused on the banking information visible in the partial printout. The account number ending in 7342 could be cross-referenced with records if he could identify the financial institution. The digits provided minimal information, but the format and prefix suggested a major national bank. He contacted the Portland office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, noting the potential interstate component of the fraud and the systematic nature of the scheme. A special agent named Linda Kirkwood was assigned to coordinate. Kirkwood's first action was to subpoena records from the 5 largest banks operating in the Portland metropolitan area, requesting all accounts with the suffix 7342 opened or accessed within the 9-month window. The request would take time, requiring judicial approval and institutional cooperation. In the interim, Howell conducted a secondary search of the Laurel Hist property. He focused on areas the family would not have occupied: the attic space, the garage, the crawl space beneath the house. In the garage, he found a metal storage cabinet, locked. The landlord provided a key. Inside lay receipts, utility bills, and a ledger, all in the name of a person Howell had not previously encountered: James Rothschild. The receipts were dated over a 3-year period and documented regular purchases: cleaning supplies, small tools, replacement parts for the house. The utility bills showed payments made through a third-party service. The ledger was more significant. It recorded income and expenses with remarkable detail. Monthly entries labeled rental, miscellaneous income, maintenance, supplies. The figures were consistent across several years, suggesting a long-standing operation. But in the ledger's final pages, the nature of the entries changed. New categories appeared: equipment storage, consulting fees, logistics support. The amounts were substantially larger, entries ranging from $2,000 to $8,000 per transaction. The names associated with these entries were single initials: MT, DP, JK, RL. The most recent entry, dated 3 weeks prior, read MT Final, $15,000. It was the last notation in the ledger. Howell photographed the ledger page by page and bagged it as evidence. He ran the initials against the known individuals in the case. MT matched Michael Thornton. DP matched Derek Paulson. JK and RL remained unidentified. The handwriting in the ledger matched neither the lease signature nor the maintenance uniform name tag. This was a third distinct hand, neat, deliberate, consistent across years of documentation. Howell searched the remainder of the garage. On the top shelf of the storage cabinet, behind the ledger, he found a laptop. Older model, approximately 4 years old, battery completely drained. Beside it lay a phone charger, a USB external hard drive, and a sealed envelope containing a handwritten address: 1847 Northwest Thurman Street, Unit 6B. The address was in the Northwest Hills neighborhood, approximately 7 kilometers from the Laurel Hist property. Howell obtained a warrant for the Thurman Street address. The building was a modest apartment complex, 4 stories, approximately 24 units. Unit 6B was on the 2nd floor. When Howell arrived with a patrol officer, the door was answered by a woman in her 60s, who identified herself as the current tenant. She'd lived there for 8 months and knew nothing of any previous occupant or activity related to the case. The landlord, when contacted, confirmed that the unit had been rented for the past 18 months by someone named Raymond Lundgren, who'd paid rent in cash and left abruptly 3 weeks prior, forfeiting his security deposit. The landlord had since leased the unit to the current occupant. RL, Howell noted, matched Raymond Lundgren. He obtained authorization to conduct a forensic examination of the apartment. Nothing of significance remained. The previous tenant had vacated completely, but the building manager agreed to preserve any records associated with the lease. Howell stood in the empty apartment, observing the space. This had been a residence, but it had also been something else, a base of operations, perhaps, or a secure location separate from the Laurel Hill property. The arrangement suggested compartmentalization, a deliberate separation of functions across multiple locations and identities. He made a note to cross-reference Raymond Lundgren's background, employment history, and financial records. He made a note to identify J.K. and to determine what role this person had played. He made a note to connect the office building theft to the basement family, to understand how these disparate elements formed a coherent criminal structure. The evidence accumulated and measured, documented detail. The laptop from the garage remained in the lab, its hard drive undergoing forensic analysis. The ledger lay in an evidence bag, awaiting further review. The Home Depot footage showed a figure whose identity remained obscure. Howell drove back toward the precinct, the Portland afternoon gray and unremarkable around him. The case was no longer a simple matter of fraud or unlicensed occupancy. It had become something larger, a systematic operation involving multiple identities, multiple locations, and resources substantial enough to suggest professional organization or significant personal motivation. He had not yet determined the endgame, but the physical evidence was converging toward a structure, and within that structure, the potential for violence or exploitation remained a documented possibility. The basement family remained in temporary housing provided by the county. The mother had been interviewed again, asked about any unusual activity, any visitors, any communication beyond the email account used to rent the space. She'd reported nothing. Her children had observed nothing. They'd existed in isolation, as intended. Howell considered this fact. The family had been contained for a reason, not simply for housing fraud or rent collection, for something else, for testimony, perhaps, or for silence. The case remained open, the facts still assembling themselves into a pattern that would eventually reveal what had been stolen, from whom, and by whose hand. The hard drive analysis took 4 days. The external drive recovered from the Thurman Street apartment contained 847 gigabytes of data, organized into folders labeled by date, location, and transaction code. The IT forensics team produced a preliminary report on Wednesday morning. The drive held financial records, spreadsheets tracking income, expenses, and account transfers across 14 separate bank accounts. The accounts were distributed across 7 different institutions, primarily regional banks with minimal fraud detection protocols. The spreadsheets documented transfers ranging from $500 to $47,000, each annotated with cryptic codes: HDWR, equip, consult, secured, temp. The equip entries correlated directly with the office building theft. Multiple transfers totaling $41,600 had been distributed across 5 accounts in the week following the theft. The transfers had been made in small increments. No single transaction exceeded $10,000, a threshold that would trigger automatic federal reporting. But beyond the financial records, the drive contained something else: video files. 7 folders, each labeled with dates spanning the 9-month period. The file sizes were substantial, approximately 800 megabytes per folder. Howell reviewed the footage with the IT forensics specialist, Detective Raymond Walsh. The videos appeared to be security camera recordings, but the source was unclear. The image quality was high, multiple angles per location, timestamp overlays, infrared capability visible in several segments. The first folder contained footage from the office building. Multiple angles showed the interior of server rooms, electrical closets, and mechanical spaces. The timestamps corresponded with the dates when Thornton's access card had been used and security cameras had experienced blackouts. The footage showed individuals, at least 2 distinct figures, sometimes 3. moving through the building, removing equipment, placing items into large carrying cases, and transiting corridors with practiced efficiency. The figures' faces were obscured in most footage, either by camera angle or deliberate positioning, but their movements suggested familiarity with the building's layout. The second figure, in particular, moved with the confidence of someone who had conducted previous reconnaissance. Howell paused the footage at 5:38 a.m. on the 28th. A figure entered the mechanical room carrying what appeared to be an electrical testing device, a meter or scanner of some kind. The figure worked at the electrical panel for 17 minutes, photographing the interior with a handheld camera, then departing. 13 minutes later, the security camera feed went offline. The connection was direct and documented. The second folder contained footage from the Thurman Street apartment. The recordings showed the interior of the unit, a living space converted into a workspace. Multiple computers occupied a desk. Networking equipment lay on shelves. In the center of the room, documents were spread across a large table: blueprints, building diagrams, access logs, personnel records. One sequence showed a figure at the table, reviewing documents and making annotations. The individual was identified in the footage timestamp metadata as Subject RL. The timestamp read 2:51 p.m., dated 7 weeks prior. The figure worked for approximately 40 minutes, photographing documents with a mobile phone, then organizing the materials back into folders. The third folder contained a single long-duration recording, approximately 6 hours in length, dated 17 days prior. The footage showed the interior of what appeared to be a small warehouse or storage unit. The time-lapse recording showed the movement and organization of equipment, the projectors, networking devices, power supplies identified in the office building theft. The equipment was being cataloged, photographed, and packed into shipping containers marked with international labels. A figure appeared in the footage at timestamp 3:22 p.m., supervising the work. This figure was clearer than others, taller, broader-shouldered, moving with deliberate authority. The individual wore a light-colored shirt and khaki pants. Most significantly, the figure bore a visible tattoo on the left forearm, partially visible in several frames. A geometric design, approximately 4 centimeters in length, dark ink. The fourth folder contained footage dated from multiple dates, all focused on a single location, the Laurel Hills property. The recordings showed the basement during the period when the family was resident. Multiple angles documented the space. One camera positioned to observe the sleeping area, another focused on the door, a third capturing the ceiling and upper walls. The timestamps showed continuous recording over weeks. The mother and 2 children appeared regularly in the footage, performing routine activities, sleeping, eating from the camping stove, using a bucket for sanitation purposes that had been positioned in a corner of the basement. The footage documented the isolation with clinical precision, but the fifth folder revealed the purpose of the surveillance. It contained footage from the basement dated 4 weeks prior, showing a visitor, an unidentified male, approximately 50 years old, entering the basement space and remaining there for approximately 30 minutes. The interaction with the family was not visible. The camera angle did not capture the entirety of the space, but audio was present. The conversation, when transcribed by IT forensics, revealed coercion. The visitor had questioned the mother about her knowledge of certain matters. The mother had consistently denied understanding what was being requested. The visitor had made references to the children, statements about cooperation and continued safety, implicit threats delivered in a measured, businesslike tone. The conversation ended when the visitor departed, satisfied apparently, or perhaps understanding that the interrogation would yield nothing further. Howell listened to the audio twice. observing the data rather than experiencing it. The visitor's voice was distinctive, slightly nasal, with a minor accent consistent with someone who had grown up in the Mountain States or Upper Midwest. The speech pattern was educated, formal, suggesting professional background or deliberate cultivation of authority. The sixth folder contained footage from locations outside the documented crime scenes. The recordings showed parking lots, street corners, the entrance to a bank branch, the loading area behind a commercial building. The footage appeared to document surveillance of third parties, individuals being tracked, their movements recorded, their activities logged. One sequence showed a man exiting a bank, entering a vehicle, driving away. The timestamp indicated this had been recorded 17 days prior. Another showed a woman entering a restaurant, remaining inside for approximately 90 minutes, then departing. A third showed an individual at a gas station, pumping fuel, paying cash at the station attendant. These were reconnaissance recordings. Howell understood this immediately. The subjects were being monitored for purposes that the available evidence did not yet clarify. The seventh folder contained what appeared to be planning documentation, still images of building layouts, written notes, timelines, and photographs of individuals. One image showed Derek Paulson's maintenance uniform name tag, photographed in close detail. Another showed Michael Thornton's employment ID badge from Pacific Northwest Facilities Management. A third showed the face of someone Howell did not recognize, a man in his 60s, professional appearance, photographed in what appeared to be an office setting. Beside this photograph, handwritten notes had been added. Subject K. Sutherland, Cascade Technical Solutions, Principal. Below this, Access Authority, All Pearl District Building Systems. Security Protocols, Emergency Procedures, Contractor Management. Controlled through financial obligation. The implications were substantial. K. Sutherland, the owner or principal of Cascade Technical Solutions, the IT contractor who had supposedly discovered the theft, appeared to have been manipulated or coerced into providing access and covering the theft. Howell immediately obtained identification records for Kenneth Sutherland and requested his financial information from the FBI liaison. The records, when retrieved, showed regular deposits into his accounts from shell corporations registered in Delaware and Nevada. The deposits totaled $127,000 over the 8-month period. Sutherland, when brought in for questioning, initially denied involvement. But when confronted with the handwritten notes recovered from the hard drive and the footage showing his building's systems being compromised, he altered his statement. He confirmed receiving payments. He confirmed being informed that his business accounts would be seized and his family endangered if he failed to cooperate. He confirmed providing access codes, disabling security systems, and falsifying audit reports. He could not, however, identify the individual who had made these demands. The contact had been made by email through encrypted communication channels, using only the identifier subject RL. Sutherland had assumed this referred to a person named Raymond, but had never met the individual in person. Howell returned to the laptop recovered from the Thurman Street apartment. The device had been partially functional after battery recharge, and IT forensics had extracted the temporary files from the hard drive cache. The most recent activity showed browsing to commercial shipping websites, logistics tracking platforms, and international customs documentation services. The search history indicated someone planning for transport, investigating methods to move physical equipment across borders, understanding tariff implications, researching insurance requirements for high-value cargo. A search for Portland Airport cargo facilities had been conducted 22 days prior. Another search for Mexico City import procedures had been executed 17 days prior. The pattern suggested preparation for transfer of the stolen equipment to an international destination. Howell reviewed the warehouse footage again, focusing on the shipping containers. The labels, when enlarged and analyzed, indicated destination addresses in Mexico City. The equipment had apparently been destined for resale or integration into a system outside United States jurisdiction, but the timing had been disrupted. The landlord's inspection of the Laurel Hills property had occurred before the equipment transfer could be completed. The operation had been interrupted mid-execution. Howell conducted a second search of the Laurel Hills property, focusing on areas where materials might be hidden or concealed. In the attic space, behind insulation in the eaves, he discovered a storage box. Inside lay additional documentation, more financial records, correspondence printed from email, and a series of photographs. The photographs showed individuals in various settings. Several depicted Raymond Lundgren, confirmed through cross-reference with his state ID photograph at different locations. Others showed individuals Howell did not recognize, some in formal settings, others in what appeared to be business meetings or social contexts. One photograph stood out. It showed 5 individuals standing together in what appeared to be an office environment. The image had been printed from a digital file, the quality consistent with standard color printer output. The individuals were identified by handwritten notes on the back. RL, subject K, MT, DP, unknown. The question mark notation suggested uncertainty about one individual's identity. Howell examined the photograph closely. The figure in question was positioned in the background, partially obscured by angle. The visible characteristics showed an individual approximately 40 to 45 years old, dark hair, wearing business attire. The individual was not Michael Thornton or Derek Paulson. Those identities were accounted for in other positions in the photograph. The unknown figure remained unidentified. Howell submitted the photograph to facial recognition systems, expanded the search parameters to include California, Washington, and Idaho law enforcement databases, and cross-referenced against known associates of Raymond Lundgren and Kenneth Sutherland. The searches returned no matches. Special Agent Linda Kirkwood from the FBI obtained subpoena authority for the credit card records of Sutherland, Thornton, Paulson, and Lundgren. The records showed a pattern of coordinated activity, purchases made at the same locations on different dates, suggesting one individual occasionally using another's cards, or cards being used sequentially after theft or transfer. One transaction stood out. A credit card registered to Kenneth Sutherland had been used to purchase airline tickets 17 days prior on a flight from Portland to Cancun, Mexico. The passenger name listed was James Richardson. The ticket had never been used. The flight log showed the seat remained empty, but the purchase had been made and payment had been processed. Howell reviewed the building security footage from the airport terminal. 17 days prior, at 11:53 a.m., a figure matching the unknown individual's approximate appearance had entered the departure area, checked luggage, and proceeded to the security checkpoint. The figure's face, captured at the checkpoint scanner, was partially visible but obscured by angle and lighting. The figure cleared security and proceeded to the departure gate. The final image showed the individual boarding the Cancun flight at 1:28 p.m. The individual's identity at that checkpoint had been established through TSA documentation. James Richardson, presenting identification issued by the state of Nevada. Howell requested Nevada DMV records for James Richardson. 14 individuals with that name were registered in the state. 3 had current driver's licenses. Cross-referencing those 3 against the photograph recovered from the Laurel Hills property attic yielded one potential match. A James Richardson, age 42, currently residing in Las Vegas, Nevada. The individual's employment history, obtained through Nevada public records, showed previous work in security consulting and private investigation. His background included military service, honorable discharge, and subsequent contract work in the private sector. The available evidence suggested he had coordinated the operation, the planning, the recruitment, the management of multiple identities and locations. The flight to Cancun indicated he had departed the operation approximately 3 weeks after the office building theft, potentially in advance of discovery or law enforcement involvement. Howell made notes documenting the escalating scope. This was no longer a simple fraud case. The operation involved interstate conspiracy, equipment theft, coercion, surveillance of unknown targets, money laundering through shell corporations, false identity documents, and human trafficking or unlawful confinement. The Basement family had served a purpose. They had provided a secure location for operations, a cover narrative, a distraction from the primary crime. Their presence, when discovered, had appeared to be an isolated landlord-tenant violation. The investigation into that violation had exposed the substantially larger enterprise beneath it. Howell reviewed the ledger recovered from the Laurelhurst garage a final time. The entry MT Final $15,000 had been dated 3 weeks prior. The notation was ambiguous. It could indicate a final payment to Michael Thornton or a final transaction conducted by Thornton before he disappeared from documented activity. Michael Thornton had not boarded any flight from Portland International or any other accessible airport. His access card had ceased being used after the theft. His employment file contained no termination record. His apartment remained unoccupied. The data showed he had simply ceased to exist within the documented record. Howell sat in the precinct's investigation room, surrounded by evidence boxes, printouts, photographs, and financial statements. The case remained fundamentally unresolved. He had identified multiple perpetrators, documented their activities, and traced the operational structure to its apparent endpoint, James Richardson's departure to Mexico. But the scope of the unknown remained substantial. Unknown targets under surveillance. Unknown reasons for the Basement family's confinement. Unknown final destination and purpose of the stolen equipment. Unknown status of Michael Thornton. The physical evidence accumulated, but the coherent explanation remained elusive. The breakthrough came from a utility bill. Howell had been reviewing the ledger recovered from the Laurelhurst garage for the 5th time, cross-referencing each transaction code against the documented evidence. The consult entries appeared frequently, accompanied by payments to various accounts. But one notation, dated 18 months prior, had caught his attention. KS Initial Consulting, $8,500. KS matched Kenneth Sutherland, the owner of Cascade Technical Solutions. But 18 months prior was before the office building theft, before Michael Thornton's employment, before Derek Paulson's lease had begun. The timeline placed Sutherland's involvement at the inception of the operation, not as a coerced participant discovered partway through. Howell had pulled Sutherland's financial records again, this time extending the analysis backward. The deposits from shell corporations began 14 months prior, consistent with receiving payments for preliminary work, planning, system evaluation. But something else appeared in those financial records: debt. Substantial debt. Sutherland's business, Cascade Technical Solutions, had been struggling. Commercial real estate loans totaling $340,000 were in default status as of 16 months prior. Credit card debt exceeded $127,000. Personal mortgage payments had been missed for 6 consecutive months before the consulting payments began to arrive. Sutherland had been desperate. The financial desperation had preceded the operation's inception by months. Howell had then reviewed Sutherland's business correspondence, obtained through the FBI's subpoena authority. Email records from 18 months prior showed communication between Sutherland and someone identified only as J. Richardson. The initial message had been professionally cordial. I am exploring potential IT consulting opportunities in the Portland area. Your firm's expertise in building infrastructure management is noted. Would you be available to discuss contract possibilities? Sutherland had responded within hours. The conversation that followed showed a progression from casual inquiry to specific proposals. Richardson had asked detailed questions about security protocols at the Pearl District building, where cameras were positioned, how access systems operated, what equipment was stored in server rooms. Sutherland had provided comprehensive answers. The emails ended abruptly after 6 exchanges, but they had established the connection between Sutherland and James Richardson, proving that the recruitment had been conducted directly by the operations coordinator, not through intermediaries or coercion. Howell had documented this, but it still did not constitute definitive proof of Sutherland's knowing participation. Sutherland had claimed under questioning that he had assumed Richardson was a potential client, that he had not understood the subsequent activities constituted theft. The claim was implausible, but not legally impossible to defend. But then came the utility bill. The Portland Water and Power Company maintained historical billing records for all commercial and residential properties. Howell had requested these for the Laurelhurst property, seeking evidence of unusual usage patterns that might corroborate claims about the basement family's isolation. The utility company had provided complete billing history for the past 3 years. Howell had examined the records methodically, documenting baseline consumption, then noting spikes that corresponded with known periods of activity. The bill dated 9 months prior, the month the family first arrived in the basement, showed a significant increase in electrical usage. Average consumption jumped from 850 kilowatt hours to 1,240 kilowatt hours. Water usage also increased proportionally, but the subsequent bills revealed something more significant. The consumption pattern remained elevated, but only partially. The electrical usage settled at approximately 1,100 kilowatt hours per month, an increase of roughly 250 kilowatt hours above baseline, consistent with the addition of residential occupants. However, the bill dated 4 months prior showed a discrete spike, 1,680 kilowatt hours of consumption, followed immediately by a return to the 1,100 kilowatt hour baseline. A single month of substantially elevated usage, then normalization. Howell had cross-referenced this spike with the operational timeline. For months prior corresponded with the period when video surveillance equipment had been installed throughout the property and the office building. Security cameras, recording devices, and related electrical infrastructure would consume significant power during setup and testing phases. The spike represented the temporary installation of surveillance equipment, followed by relocation to permanent locations or standby status. This observation alone was not determinative, but Howell had then examined the billing details more carefully. The utility bill included itemized charges, broken down by service location and account holder. The Laurelhurst property account was maintained under the landlord's name, but the detailed charges showed an oddity. A second meter had been installed on the property 4 months prior. The meter had generated charges for 2 months, the month of the spike and 1 month subsequent, then had been disconnected. A second meter required a work order. Howell had contacted Portland Water and Power Service Department, requesting documentation of the meter installation. The work order had been submitted by Cascade Technical Solutions. Kenneth Sutherland, through his company, had personally arranged the installation of a second electrical meter at the Laurelhurst property. The meter served no documented purpose. The property required only a single service connection. The installation suggested preparation for temporary, disconnectable power supply to equipment that needed to operate independently from the main residential system. Howell had then requested records of what had been billed to that second meter. The utility company's data showed approximately 580 kilowatt-hours of consumption during the 2 months the meter was active, then discontinuation. This was the amount of electrical draw consistent with continuous operation of multiple security camera systems, servers, and recording devices. The installation had been conducted by Sutherland's company. The equipment had operated for exactly 2 months, the duration consistent with equipment testing, calibration, and preparation for the coordinated operation. The meter had been removed before the office building theft occurred, suggesting the testing phase had concluded and the surveillance apparatus had been relocated. Howell had sat at his desk, the utility bill in his hands, and understood. Sutherland had not been recruited into the operation by James Richardson. Sutherland had been a willing participant from the inception. He had been financially desperate, professionally failing, and eager for what appeared to be a lucrative consulting opportunity. Richardson had identified this vulnerability, likely through preliminary research into Portland-area IT contractors who had access to high-value buildings, and had approached Sutherland with a specific proposal. The proposal had been not simply to provide access, but to design and install the infrastructure that would enable the theft. Sutherland had been the architect of the operation's technical components. He had evaluated building security, designed the surveillance systems, planned the security compromise, and managed the equipment logistics. The initial consulting payments had been advance compensation for this work. The subsequent payments, the $127,000 total, had been compensation for ongoing management and the provision of false audit documentation. Sutherland had claimed ignorance of the theft's ultimate purpose, but his involvement in the technical planning was undeniable. He had known what was being stolen and had deliberately engineered the means to accomplish it. The basement family had served as cover, a secondary operation conducted by other members of the conspiracy, using the Laurel Hist property as a base of operations and as a narrative distraction. If law enforcement became involved in the housing violation, the investigation would focus on the unlicensed occupancy, not on the coordination between Sutherland and Richardson. Michael Thornton had been the on-site operator, the individual who maintained access to the office building, managed the day-to-day execution, and coordinated with Richardson. Derek Paulson had been the financial facilitator, managing the shell accounts, distributing payments, and maintaining the paper trail. Raymond Lundgren had been the logistics coordinator, arranging transportation, managing the warehouse storage, and preparing the equipment for international transfer. James Richardson had been the mastermind, identifying the target, recruiting the key personnel, managing the operational timeline, and planning the exit strategy through Mexico. But Sutherland was the linchpin. Without his technical expertise and his willingness to compromise building systems, the operation could not have succeeded. Without his company's legitimate contract with the building, the access and the false audit would have been impossible. Howell had reviewed the email conversation between Sutherland and Richardson one final time, reading the messages with complete understanding of their true content. Richardson's initial message, exploring potential IT consulting opportunities, had been a reconnaissance probe. Sutherland's response had been an opening. The subsequent questions about security protocols had been detailed specification requests, disguised as casual inquiries from a potential client. Sutherland had provided the information willingly, understanding exactly what he was enabling. The motive was uncomplicated. Sutherland had been facing financial ruin. His business was collapsing. His personal finances were devastated. The consulting payments had represented salvation, an opportunity to stabilize his debt position and restore his business viability. The operation had been carefully structured to insulate Sutherland from direct criminal liability. He had not stolen the equipment. He had not coerced the basement family. He had not traveled to Mexico or managed the resale logistics. He had simply provided technical expertise and ensured system vulnerability. The compartmentalization was deliberate and effective, but the utility bill, the work order, and the second meter installation created an unbroken chain of evidence. Sutherland had consciously installed equipment specifically designed to enable the theft. The installation had been documented, dated, and traceable directly to his company. Howell had closed the file and had called Special Agent Linda Kirkwood. "We need to amend the charging documents for Sutherland," he had said. "He's not a coerced participant. He's a primary conspirator." The utility work order and meter installation proved knowing involvement in the planning and execution of the theft. Kirkwood had reviewed the documentation and had agreed. The utility bill was the final evidence required. It transformed Sutherland's narrative from reluctant victim to willing collaborator. Sutherland, when confronted again with this evidence, had abandoned his previous claims. He had provided a detailed statement documenting his relationship with Richardson, their initial negotiation, the specific technical requirements he had been asked to fulfill, and his understanding that the operation involved theft of high-value equipment. He had not provided information that led to Richardson's apprehension. Richardson had apparently severed all contact upon departing to Mexico. But Sutherland had confirmed the operational structure, the timeline, and the coordination between the various perpetrators. Michael Thornton remained unlocated. Derek Paulson's identity had been verified as fictitious. The person who had actually rented the Laurel Hist property under that name remained unidentified, though surveillance footage and financial records suggested correlation with Raymond Lundgren. The office building theft was now understood in complete detail. The basement family had been placed in the Laurel Hist property as additional cover and possibly as leverage against one of the operational participants. Their confinement remained unexplained beyond the operational advantage they provided. But the case was now resolved in its essential components. The perpetrators were identified. The structure of the conspiracy was documented. The motives were understood. Howell had filed the amended charging documents and had prepared the comprehensive investigative summary for prosecution. He had noted in his final report that the breakthrough had come from examination of a single utility bill, a mundane record that had connected one person's financial desperation to a deliberate decision to enable theft. The case exemplified what investigation required: patience, methodical review of seemingly insignificant details, and the willingness to reconsider previous conclusions in light of new evidence. There had been no dramatic revelation, no sudden confession, simply the accumulation of facts until they formed an undeniable conclusion. Sutherland had made one choice that had altered everything. He had allowed his financial desperation to override ethical judgment. He had agreed to install equipment knowing its purpose. He had falsified audit documentation knowing it would cover a theft. That single choice, documented through a utility bill and a work order, had connected him irrevocably to a conspiracy that extended across state lines and involved multiple perpetrators operating under assumed identities. The basement family was being processed through victim support services. The mother had been offered witness protection if she could provide any additional details about the visitor who had interrogated her. She had recalled only fragmentary information, references to an arrangement that required cooperation, veiled threats regarding the children's well-being, and a voice that suggested the visitor had authority within the operations hierarchy. Howell understood that the interrogation had likely been conducted by one of the conspiracy members, verifying that the family would remain silent if discovered. The family had been maintained in isolation to ensure they could provide no testimony about the operation's technical components or the equipment that had been stored and managed on the property. They had been held as insurance against exposure. The case had required 3 months of investigation to reach its resolution. The physical evidence had accumulated gradually: receipts, financial records, video footage, utility bills, work orders. Each piece had seemed marginal in isolation. Collectively, they had painted a complete picture. Sutherland faced federal charges including conspiracy to commit theft, wire fraud, and falsification of records. His expected sentence, according to the prosecutor's preliminary analysis, was substantial, likely 15 to 20 years in federal custody. His business would be dissolved. His remaining assets would be seized as restitution. His professional reputation would be permanently destroyed. All of this had resulted from a single decision made 18 months prior, when Kenneth Sutherland had agreed to discuss IT consulting with a man named James Richardson. That conversation had been the true beginning. Everything that followed, the installation of equipment, the theft, the confinement of the family, the international transfer of equipment, the coordination of multiple identities and false documentation, had been the logical consequence of that initial decision to prioritize financial recovery over legal and ethical responsibility. Howell had reviewed the case one final time before submitting the investigative summary. The evidence was comprehensive. The legal pathway to conviction was clear. The motive was established and documented. The case was closed. He had filed the report at 3:54 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon in Portland. The city outside continued its ordinary operations. Traffic moved along streets. People conducted their business. The institutional machinery of governance and commerce proceeded indifferently to the closure of a single criminal investigation. But the investigation had revealed something significant about the structure of conspiracy, about how financial desperation could cloud judgment, and about how a single mundane document, a utility bill showing an otherwise inexplicable spike in electrical consumption, could ultimately prove the difference between ambiguous circumstance and conclusive criminal liability.